It is predicted that on July 6th, 2024, former President Jimmy Carter will die. I do realize that no skeptic will believe that predicting the date of Jimmy Carter's death will be anything more than luck or coincidence, given his age of 99 years old and him currently being in a hospice. That is why it is also being predicted that on July 5th, one day before the predicted death of Jimmy Carter, whose name is also James Earl Carter, will be the death of James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader. Jimmy Carter was born in 1924 and will die in 2024 because the 2424th word, 2424th word, in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word Jesus. Jimmy Carter, JC, hints at Jesus Christ. James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King, who also played King Jaffe Jaffer in the movie Coming to America, is king symbolism. JC, Jesus Christ, is the King of Kings. No rational person will be able to conclude that when James Earl Jones dies on July 5th and Jimmy Carter dies on July 6th, as predicted, that it will be a coincidence or random luck. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that former President Jimmy Carter will die on July 6th, and that his prophetic funeral, in which Trump will sit next to Obama, will be on July 11th. I am predicting that James Earl Jones, the voice of the Lion King and the voice of Darth Vader, will die on July 5th. I am predicting that Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash in St. Louis on July 22nd. She will be replaced by Michelle Obama. I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on July 24th. I am predicting that dirty bombs will explode in Manhattan, New York City, and there will be a large-scale evacuation on July 25th. I am predicting that Israel will bomb Iran on July 26th. I am predicting that on July 27th, 2024, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to the fifth trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens, and it is probable that on July 27th, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. At some point, there will be a massive Mary apparition that will deceive the masses, because all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. July 27th will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. I am predicting that on August 2nd, Joe Biden will step down and make Michelle Obama the 47th president. It is predicted that Michelle Obama will make Barack Obama her vice president on August 18th, 2024, and then it is predicted that she will step down and make Barack Obama the 48th president on August 25th. It is predicted that on August 6th, the historic barge that has been stuck on the rocks of the Niagara River for over 100 years will finally break free and crash over Niagara Falls. I am predicting that on August 10th, Israel will nuke and completely destroy Damascus, Syria. I am predicting that on August 29th, President Trump will die from a heart attack. August 13th will be the date of a catastrophic solar flare from the sun that will knock out the power grid in America that will lead to food shortages. August 15th will be the date of the resurrection rapture, the first of two raptures. The second rapture will be on September 5th. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this essential introductory information in another video, you can skip ahead 31 minutes. The information in this video is showing how God was pointing to the date July 1st in regards to the predicted death of James Earl Carter, former President Jimmy Carter. The prediction being made in this video that James Earl Carter or Jimmy Carter would die on July 1st is 100% correct. The information in this video is valid. God was pointing overwhelmingly to July 1st, 2024 with Jimmy Carter connections. Not only is the information in these videos that predicted July 1st valid, it is extremely important and must be watched. Through the connections God used to point to July 1st, God told important stories and revealed essential knowledge. These videos must be watched. July 1st ended up being a step in the trail of signs that is 10 days before Carter's predicted funeral at the National Cathedral on July 11th, 2024. There were prophetic signs on July 1st, 2024 that confirmed all of the analysis, and they revealed adding 10 days to July 1st to reach July 11th. I will explain this. Also, it was predicted that Carter's funeral at the National Cathedral would be on July 6th, 2024. It is now believed that the reason why God is pointing to the date July 6th in regards to Jimmy Carter is that this will be the date of his death. July 6th is 5 days after the prophetic signs related to Carter that occurred on July 1st. And July 6th will be 5 days before the predicted date of Carter's funeral. These two sets of 5 days between July 1st and July 6th and July 11th hints at the two sets of 5 commandments in the 10 Commandments, which is the reason why one of the prophetic signs that occurred on July 1st, 2024, pointed to the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which is a romantic comedy movie about do's and don'ts in a relationship. In pointing to this movie, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, God revealed adding 10 days to July 1st to reach July 11th, the date of Carter's prophetic funeral. The question is, how did God point to this movie, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days? One of the extremely profound ways in which God pointed to July 1st was that it was 1,290 days after the first Israeli took the thing on December 19th, 2020. This was also the day that the leader of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, took the thing. In the last verses of the prophetic book of Daniel, there is a mention of a period of 1,290 days following the setting up of a spiritual abomination on the Temple Mount. The Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount is a spiritual abomination, as is the Dome of the Rock. In fact, this is a typo. I really, in fact, mean to refer to the Dome of the Rock. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock are the two mosques on top of the Temple Mount, but I'm specifically referring to the Dome of the Rock, the golden dome in the iconic images of the Temple Mount, the mosque with the golden dome. Okay, so the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount is a spiritual abomination, and it was completed in 688 AD. 688 AD plus 1,290 years was 1978, the year of the Camp David Accords, that were brokered by President Jimmy Carter. The giving back of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt with the Camp David Accords was an extreme transgression against God. In the prior verse in Daniel, there is a mention of 1,260 days. 688 AD plus 1,260 years was 1948, the year that Israel was reborn after 19 centuries. In other words, the 1,260-day years connection to 1948 is a second witness that confirms the relevance of adding 1,290 years to 688 AD to get 1978, the big year prophetically for Jimmy Carter. And that is why this number 1,290 is relevant with Jimmy Carter and in context of a spiritual abomination, which is why after the first Israeli and the leader of Israel took the spiritual abomination, which is the thing, was July 1st. And this was one, again, of the ways that God was, extremely profound ways in which God pointed to July 1st in regards to Jimmy Carter. Because of this connection, it was expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving a spiritual abomination and the Antichrist, if Jimmy Carter were to not die on this date. So if Jimmy Carter if it isn't the end of the trail of signs leading to the death of Jimmy Carter, it means that it would be a step, and therefore we would expect a sign involving a spiritual abomination and the Antichrist on this July 1st date. God is demonstrating that Jimmy Carter is symbolic of the first of 7 kings in Bible prophecy. In Revelation chapter 17:11 in the Bible, there is a mention of a series of 7 kings followed by an 8th king. A secondary fulfillment, a secondary symbolic fulfillment of this prophecy, not the primary fulfillment of this prophecy, is Jimmy Carter, who was inaugurated in 77, as in 1977, began a succession of 7 presidents that leads to the identification of the Antichrist, who is the 6th and 8th presidents, and therefore the symbolic 6th and 8th kings in the prophecy. The name Barack Obama is equal to 68 in simple English gematria, which is A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, etc. And therefore, his name in a succession of presidents that begins with Carter, Barack Obama is the 6th president and is predicted to become the 8th president, which is why his name equals 68 in simple English gematria. Trump is the 7th president after Carter was inaugurated in 77, which is why Trump was elected by 77 electoral votes. And on Trump's inauguration day, in the year that ended in the number 7, he was exactly 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old. 77 days after his inauguration, Trump launched 59 missiles into Syria. 59 is the 7th super prime number. The 17th prime number is 59, and 17 is the 7th prime number, making 59 the 7th super prime number. Ancient Rome was founded after a period of 7 kings that ended in 509 BC, which is why, incidentally, the reason for the 7 kings in this Bible prophecy is it is because the primary fulfillment of it identifies Rome. Okay, so in ancient Rome, it is widely known in ancient history, or rather, it is widely known that ancient history tells us that ancient Rome was founded after a period of 7 kings that ended in 509 BC. 509 hints at 59, the 7th super prime number. At Carter's funeral, the presidents will be lined up in chronological order, which will point to this prophecy in Revelation about a chronological order of 7 kings, followed by an 8th king. Trump, the 7th king, and Obama, the 8th king, are predicted to sit next to each other at Carter's funeral. In the prophecy, it is said that the 8th king was, is not, and will be again. Obama was the president, is not the president, and it is predicted he will become the president again on August 25th, 2024. The predicted funeral on July 11th will be exactly 509 days after Carter first went into a hospice, and this hints at the succession of kings in Rome that ended in 509 BC. George W. Bush will also be sitting in the row of presidents at Carter's funeral, and Bush will turn 78 years old. In other words, his 78th birthday will be the date it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die, on July 6th. His age of 78 will hint at the 7th and 8th kings in the prophecy. George W. Bush is the 5th king in this fulfillment of the prophecy, and it's only symbolic, and it's a secondary to the primary one, as I said. But George Bush was the 5th king after Carter in this fulfillment of the prophecy, and the prophecy speaks of the first 5 kings being similar and having left the scene before the 6th through 8th kings. As mentioned, on July 1st, it was expected that either Jimmy Carter would die or there would be prophetic signs that provided king and spiritual abomination symbolism. On July 1st, the Supreme Court ruled that the president is entitled to immunity from prosecution for official acts of his duties as president. President Biden is not the symbolic 8th king in this prophecy because he is a puppet of Obama's people in the permanent government ruling class of Democrats in Washington, otherwise known as the deep state. In response to the Supreme Court's decision, acting President Biden delivered a speech about how America was founded on the notion that it would not have kings, which is ironic and prophetic because, like everything the left claims these days, the opposite is true, and Biden, the puppet of Obama and his people, is America's first king dictator. Also, in the Supreme Court's dissenting opinion, Justice Sotomayor, Obama's first appointee, said that America now has a king. She used the word king for America's leader on the date it was expected there would be a symbolic Antichrist king sign. Prior to July 1st, we also expected a sign with spiritual abomination symbolism. On this date, famous Hollywood screenwriter Robert Towne died at the age of 89. Robert Towne died on July 1st, this date that we were expecting a spiritual abomination. And he died at the age of 89. Robert Towne died at 89, exactly 1,711 days after the death of famous Hollywood movie producer Robert Evans died at the age of 89. So they both died at the age of 89. 89 is the 24th prime number. These two men worked together in Hollywood, and their two deaths at the age of 89, which hints at the 24th prime number, hints at Jimmy Carter, who was born in 24, as in 1924, and will die in 24, as in 2024. Jimmy Carter's initials, JC, hint at Jesus Christ, and G2424 in Strong's Greek Bible Concordance is the word Jesus. Robert Towne's death on 7/1, July 1st, 7/1, 1,711 days after the death of Robert Evans, hints at the prophecy in Revelation 17:11 about the 7 kings followed by an 8th king. All right, so the 1,711 days hints at Revelation 17:11, which is why Robert Towne died on the day the Supreme Court Justice said that America now has a king. This hints at the coming Antichrist king, who will be defeated by the King of Kings at his second coming in 2024. If the starting date is not included in the calculation, this period of 1,711 days in between the deaths of Robert Evans and Robert Towne is also 1,710 days, and 171 is the 18th triangular number, and 18 is equal to 6 plus 6 plus 6, and 666 is the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. In Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist's rule is symbolized by 7 years. Robert Evans is credited with making Paramount Studios a major success after ruling as its chief for 7 years, as in the Antichrist's period of 7 years. Robert Towne won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for his movie Chinatown, which Robert Evans produced. The movie starred Jack Nicholson, and during its production, Nicholson learned from a reporter that his deceased sister and mother were in reality his mother and grandmother, which was an eerie coincidence given that in the movie, which Nicholson was filming at the time of him learning this, Nicholson's character learns the shocking secret that Faye Dunaway's character is both the sister and the mother of another character as a result of incest with her father at the age of 15. The movie was directed by Roman Polanski, who is known for the sexual relationship he had with a 13-year-old girl. Polanski's pregnant wife, Sharon Tate, was murdered by Manson family members. Polanski directed the movie Rosemary's Baby, which Robert Evans also worked on. The horror movie Rosemary's Baby is about a pregnant woman who gives birth to the baby Antichrist. In the movie, the baby has the eyes of his father, Satan, and the baby is an abomination. Robert Evans died exactly 2,620 weeks after the release of Rosemary's Baby, and 262 is the 84th semi-prime number. The name Obama is equal to 84 in Hebrew gematria, and Obama was born, the Antichrist was born, as in Rosemary's Baby's Antichrist birth, on the date 8/4. Therefore, the movie Rosemary's Baby connects to the death of Robert Evans, and his death connects to the death of Robert Towne on the date that it was expected that there would be a prophetic sign involving a spiritual abomination. Robert Evans's last movie that he produced was How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, which is why it is predicted that Jimmy Carter's prophetic funeral, in which the presidents will be lined up in chronological order, will be 10 days after the death of Robert Towne, which was the same day that the Supreme Court Obama appointee said that America now has a king, as in the Antichrist king, Barack Obama. What is also amazing is that on July 1st, the date that we were expecting a sign involving Jimmy Carter and his death, was the day that the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library announced that for Jimmy Carter's 100th birthday celebration, the library is planning to have a film festival, a movie festival, and the festival will be running from 10 a.m. until 10 p.m., which hints at the movies that I just mentioned, including the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. In other words, the 100th birthday celebration with a film festival hints at the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. 100 hints at the number 10. What is also interesting too is that Jimmy Carter set up the Georgia State Film Office after the success of the movie Deliverance during the time that Jimmy Carter was the governor. Georgia went on to become a place where movies are made, and this started when Jimmy Carter was the governor of Georgia. Deliverance hints at the deliverance from the Antichrist of God's faithful through JC, which is why Jimmy Carter's initials, JC, hint at Jesus Christ. Robert Towne got his start in movies through working under Roger Corman. Roger Corman is said to be the Pope of pop cinema, the spiritual godfather of the new Hollywood, and the king of cult. Corman is also known for his Poe cycle of 8 movies. These 8 movies were inspired by 8 different writings of Edgar Poe. Roger Corman hints at how Pope Francis is the 7th king, and how a revived Roman Empire is the 8th king in the primary fulfillment of this prophecy in Revelation regarding the 5th through 8th kings. This is why Roger Corman died 58 days before it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die on July 6th, 2024. In the secondary fulfillment of this prophecy, Obama is the 8th king, and 8 movies in the King of Cults Poe cycle also hints at 4+4 and the 44th president. Robert Towne also wrote the screenplay for the Tom Cruise movie Days of Thunder. The name Barak in Hebrew means lightning. In Luke 10:18 in the Bible, Jesus said that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. The name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. Barak means lightning, Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven, as it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place, and O, in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, is the word from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. Days of Thunder was released on June 27, 1990, exactly 34 years and 1 month before what is predicted to be Seven Thunders Day on July 27, 2024. July 27, 2024 will be a symbolic beginning of the 7 thunders of judgment that are mentioned in the book of Revelation. In other words, 7/27 or July 27, 2024 will be the beginning of the Days of Thunder. The 7 thunders will be supernatural phenomena such as demons pretending to be aliens and the demonic possession of the masses. 34 years and 1 month hints at 341, the 110th semi-prime number, and 110 is symbolic of the walls of security of Jericho that collapsed in God's judgment. Joshua, who led the Israelites before the walls collapsed, died at the age of 110, and this is why the Twin Towers that collapsed on 9/11 were 110 stories high. 34 years and 1 month is also 409 months, and 409 is the 40 plus 40th prime number, which hints at the 44th president, whose name means lightning. And again, this 409 months is a connection from the release of the movie Days of Thunder. To confirm his signs and connections, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together, as the 44th president is also the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school. Robert Towne's Days of Thunder cost 2 times 30 million, which hints at 23, to make, and it was released 44 days before the release of Robert Towne's sequel to his Chinatown movie, The Two Jakes. More than a decade after the release of the movie Chinatown, Robert Towne and Robert Evans collaborated again on a sequel named The Two Jakes. It is said that The Two Jakes faced a troubled production and went through several years of development hell. The name The Two Jakes hints at the two Antichrists. The two Roberts that made The Two Jakes further confirms this. A sequel movie is symbolic of the second presidency, a sequel for Barack Obama, the second of the two Antichrists in Bible prophecy. The Two Jakes was directed by Jack Nicholson. This hints at the Antichrist directing the persecution of the saints in order for God to purge them of their Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians hold and practice, and that Jesus said would come to make war on with the sword of his mouth, on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this Nicolaitan doctrine. Make sure that you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel and read the links that will be in the description box below this video. The reason for the coincidence in the names of Robert Towne winning the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for the movie Chinatown is that Robert Towne and Chinatown point to China. China is symbolic of the red dragon in Bible prophecy that is a metaphor for Satan and his representative, the Antichrist. There is another prophecy in Revelation in which the second of the two Antichrists, Barack Obama, is said to speak like a dragon. This is because Barack Obama and his allies on the political left constantly speak lies while accusing their opponents of lying and doing the very things that they are doing, which is textbook communist strategy that Barack Obama learned from his days studying radical, subversive, leftist political strategy. The truth is, Barack Obama was a member of the May 19th Communist Organization, which bombed the Capitol building in Washington in 1983. The organization was disbanded in 1985, the year that Obama moved to Chicago to further pursue radical leftist politics. The purpose of this prediction in this video, that is from God, is to prove what I have just said. The reason why the name China is pointed to through Robert Towne and Chinatown is because it hints at the movie The Manchurian Candidate. In the 1962 movie The Manchurian Candidate, the protagonist's name is Marco, and the movie was directed by John Frankenheimer, who was said to be the last of the dictatorial style of directors. The name Frankenheimer hints at Frankenstein, and he also directed Island of Dr. Moreau, about genetic experiments that create half-human, half-animal creatures. The production of the movie Island of Dr. Moreau is said to have been the most cursed movie ever made, and interesting documentaries have been made about this. The name Marco and Frankenheimer from the Manchurian Candidate hints at the mark of the Antichrist that changes a person's chromosomes, making them an Obama nation, as in abomination. The mark of the Antichrist has inserted snake venom chromosomes into people's chromosomes, which is what is alluded to with the half-human, half-animals in Island of Dr. Moreau. This makes these people an abomination, as in Obama nation. The number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, and Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate cost $2.2 million to make. John Frankenheimer died exactly 22 years before it is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die on July 6, 2024. At Carter's funeral, Joe Biden will sit in the row of presidents, followed by Trump and Obama. Biden and his brain dementia is symbolic of the character in The Manchurian Candidate that is brainwashed by communist operatives within the US government and who isn't fully aware of what he is doing. Obama is symbolic of the communist Manchurian Candidate in the movie The Manchurian Candidate, who is waiting for the death of someone in order to gain the president's office and usher in an authoritarian regime in the US. This awaited death will be the predicted death of Kamala Harris in a plane crash on July 22nd, 2024, which will be 4 times 4 days, which hints at the 44th president, after the predicted death of Jimmy Carter. The movie The Manchurian Candidate was released 446 days after the birth of Barack Obama. 446 hints at the 44th president and the 46th president. And the characters in the movie The Manchurian Candidate point to these presidential candidates. If you have already watched this very important introductory information in another video, you can skip ahead 25 minutes. Prior to May 17, 2024, it was predicted that Jimmy Carter would die on this date. However, it turned out to be an important step in the trail of signs that is leading to the death of Jimmy Carter 45 days later after May 17th on July 1st. This very, very important video will explain, among other things, how May 17th was known ahead of time. And the prophetic signs that occurred on May 17th revealed adding 45 days, as I will clearly explain. But this is how God's big picture of signs works. It's an interconnected web of prophetic signs. All of the prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. And so prior to May 17th, it was recognized that it was 39 days after the very important prophetic solar eclipse that traversed across America on April 8th. 39 because Jimmy Carter is the 39th president. Now, the full name of Jimmy Carter is James Earl Carter, which is why God has overlapped the signs for Jimmy Carter with James Earl Jones. And James Earl Jones is predicted to die 2 + 2 days later after James Earl Carter. James Earl Jones is predicted to die on July 5th. 2 + 2 days, one reason being Jimmy Carter has 22 grandchildren, and also Plains, Georgia equals 220 in gematria. But more regarding this significance of this 2 + 2 days is explained in other videos. It was originally believed that James Earl Jones, in fact, would die on May 17th. And then it was recognized that also God was pointing to Jimmy Carter, and that May 17th was 39 days. It's 40 days inclusive count after the eclipse, and that's relevant because the eclipse went over the path of totality, 7 cities in America named Nineveh. and Jonah in the Bible preached repentance and destruction for Nineveh for 40 days. One of the signs we received on May 17th that confirmed all of the analysis is that the Dow Jones stock market index closed above 40,000 points for the first time. This was actually recognized that this would occur ahead of time as well. It was predicted that the Dow would close above 40,000 for the first time on specifically May 17th. To be fair, though, this wasn't recognized more than just a couple of days beforehand, although it could have been. I just wasn't paying attention. And so the Dow Jones hints at James Earl Jones. It's a James Earl Jones sign. It's part of this trail of signs, as is James Earl Carter. All right, now the sign we received on, other signs we received on May 17th that confirm adding 45 days, as I'll explain here, also relate to James Earl Jones. One reason why, a big reason why, May 17th was known ahead of time is that it was exactly 415 months after the 1989 World Series earthquake in San Francisco, for which the area code is 415, which is known for having interrupted the broadcast to the opening of the World Series game number 3, right after James Earl Jones read the poem that Bartlett Giamatti wrote, the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. Bartlett Giamatti had just died a month and a half earlier. The Commissioner of Baseball died while in office after having been exactly in office for 5 months. But that's why the poem was read, and it was read by James Earl Jones, who also starred in the movie Field of Dreams, the most iconic baseball movie ever made. Field of Dreams is about the 1919 Chicago Black Sox and the World Series scandal that brought about the first commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He was made the commissioner and was given unchecked power over every single person in baseball, professional baseball, in a moment of crisis after the 1919 Chicago Black Sox World Series scandal. And so James Earl Jones was born 7 years and 77 days before the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. And he read the poem of the commissioner to open the broadcast of the prophetic 1989 World Series, Game 3, which was followed 4 minutes after him reading the poem with the earthquake that knocked out the power in the broadcast booth. And again, the Field of Dreams movie was also released in 1989, the year of the earthquake. And again, the Field of Dreams movie, the most iconic baseball movie ever made, is about the 1919 Chicago Black Sox, which, as I just explained, points to the first commissioner of baseball, as does the 7th commissioner of baseball. That's why James Earl Jones was born 7 years and 77 days prior. That's also a hint at the 7 and 7 times 7 that the Israelites enacted as they marched around the walls of security of Jericho in the Bible before the walls collapsed in God's judgment. And that's because America's walls are collapsing in God's judgment. And by the way, the walls of security of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake. Archaeology proves this. And the reason for pointing to the first commissioner of baseball is that he was given his power exactly 666 days after the ratification of the 18th Amendment. And 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. The 18th Amendment was prohibition, which restricted the buying and selling of alcohol. Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation talks about the restriction of buying and selling, and if one reads this correctly, it involves food. Furthermore, God's prophetic signs confirm that the buying and selling will be, the restriction of buying and selling will be focused on food because of the food rationing that will occur after the coming solar flare will knock out the power grid, which is why the power was knocked out in the broadcast booth after James Earl Jones read the poem. And God is using in his prophetic signs a metaphor of a roaring lion to symbolize this coming solar flare, which is why James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King, which in the movie, The Lion King, which hints at the coming solar flare, the lion's roar from the sun. The Lion King movie was released in 1994. 1994. I forget the exact number of days, but it actually does connect. It cost $45 million. So here we go with the beginning of the 45s, right? We already alluded to one, which was the exact 415 months, which I'll explain in a minute. The 415 months, by the way, May 17th, 2024 was exactly 415 months after the earthquake in San Francisco. And San Francisco, the area code for the city is 415. Okay, so the movie The Lion King was released in May of 1994, just prior to June of 1994 and the 17th of June, which was the day of the infamous car chase of O.J. Simpson. Okay, and that interrupted, it was known for interrupting the broadcast of the finals of the NBA, just like the earthquake exactly 56 months earlier interrupted the broadcast of the World Series. I forget which network, but whatever network was covering the NBA finals stopped covering it in order to cover the chase of O.J. Simpson up the highway in Southern California. Okay, so 56 months, because 56 is 7 plus 7 times 7. 7 times 7, 49, plus 7, 56. It's a 3 sets of 7. But the Israelites enacting the symbolic 3 sets of 7 was more precisely a 7 followed by a 7 times 7, because they marched around once per day for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 more times while blowing 7 trumpets. It was a 7 and then a 7 times 7. All right, now, just to wrap this up and explain the reason for the 45 days, O.J. Simpson's full name is Orenthal James Simpson. Orenthal is an anagram in God's signs for Earl. And so Orenthal James Simpson is in fact a sign pointing to James Earl Jones. In fact, the news of his death broke on April 11th, which was a date that was predicted ahead of time to be related to James Earl Jones. It was actually believed that James Earl Jones would die on that day, and then we had that death and another death that was king symbolism as well. O.J. Simpson's death was that day, Orenthal James Simpson. Now, Orenthal James Simpson was born in San Francisco, and he played for the San Francisco 49ers. So there is another connection. His chase was exactly 56 months after the earthquake, and 56 is a 3 sets of 7. And again, the walls of security of Jericho collapsed due to an earthquake after a 3 sets of 7. Okay, so now, on May 17th, which actually connects with the prophetic number of days, months exactly. Let me just get that. Yes, the chase, because it was on the 17th of the month, just like May 17th, 2024, the date that this video is about, which is why I'm explaining what happened on May 17th in context of Jimmy Carter and why his death will be 45 days later. May 17th, 2024 was exactly 29 years and 11 months after the car chase of O.J. Simpson that ended at 9 p.m. The climax of it all was at 9 p.m. The arrest warrant for O.J. Simpson went out at 11 a.m. That's a pairing of 9 and 11 that confirms the signs and connections, and that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which you would provide a second witness, if we think about it, is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 11, because it hints at, for one thing, the warning of judgment on 9/11. Well, 29 years and 11 months, which is the amount of time between the car chase and May 17th, 2024, also hints at 9/11. 29, if God were to symbolize 9/11 through the use of only two numbers, it would be 92 or 29, because 2 is 1 plus 1, and that hints at the 11. And so it's 29 years and 11 months, which is hinting at 9/11. Furthermore, it connects with the OJ car chase, which also is embedded in it 9/11, because it ended at 9 p.m. Okay, so now the thing is that the sign we received, one of the other signs besides the Dow Jones sign, was the news of the number one golfer in the world being arrested, and he was arrested and stopped in his car. Just like at 9 p.m., O.J. Simpson was stopped in his car. Okay, now, as I mentioned at the beginning, May 17th was exactly 415 months after the earthquake in the area code 415. Okay, now, the number one golfer was arrested for 4 crimes in the 15th state. And also, this was right before the PGA Championship. He was on his way. It interrupted, just like the car chase interrupted the NBA Finals and the earthquake interrupted the Game 3. This arrest interrupted him getting to his tee-off time. All right? If you know the story of that arrest. It was a major story in the news. Okay? So what happened was someone died, got hit by a bus as the people were coming into the grounds in Kentucky of the Valhalla golf course, which, by the way, Valhalla is symbolic of the afterlife. And okay, so anyway, someone died, and then there was chaos, and there was police directing traffic, and allegedly Scott Scheffler, the golfer, didn't heed to the instructions of a police officer. Someone has reported that Scheffler didn't think that it was a police officer and was just security, but that's just, anyway, it's not even relevant. But the point is that he was stopped. What happened was the police officer grabbed onto his car, and the Scheffler dragged him 10 feet, and then he was stopped. Siren, light, he was stopped in his car just like O.J. Simpson. And then he was taken out of his car just like O.J. Simpson. And then arrested on the side of his vehicle just like O.J. Simpson. Okay? And it was before the PGA Championship. So, just like the NBA Finals and the World Series. Okay. So, forget number one for a second. He was arrested for 4 crimes in the 15th state. That hints at 415. And this was exactly 415 months after the earthquake in the area code 415. Not only that, though, God provides a second witness, if that's not enough. The second witness here is that this is the number one golfer, and the big story was how he, although was arrested and taken to the cop shop, he still returned in time to tee off and play his game and scored 5 under. So he was arrested for 4 crimes, the number one golfer, and then proceeded to score an amazing 5 under par. That's another 415. Also, the number one golfer in the world had won at this time the last 4 out of 5 tournaments that he had played in. That's another 415. It's also a 45. So, by the way, is getting arrested for 4 crimes and then scoring 5 under. That's also a 45. But it's also a 415 when you include that he's the number one golfer. So we have 2 45s there already, in fact. Here's another 1 and a 45. The I-45. God uses this. It's amazing. The Lord is the most creative being ever, of course. The Lord is so creative with his prophetic signs. The I-45, because Scott Scheffler is from Dallas, and on this day, there was this prophetic storm downtown Houston, Harris County, and Houston and Dallas are connected with the I-45. And that's a 45, but it's also a 415 because, like I'm saying in his signs, God has used the I's in the highways for symbolism for the number 1 in prior signs. This wouldn't be the first example. I'm not making this up. God has established this. This is a second witness. So the I-45 also hints at 45, but it's also hinting at 415 because it's got a 1 and then an I-45, right? The 1 and 45. But the reason why the storm is prophetic is that it was reported at first that there was at least 4 deaths, and then it was reported there were 5 deaths. But also, it was reported as if it was a bomb that went off in downtown Houston because it shattered windows of skyscrapers. The downtown core of Houston was a mess. The mayor was saying, don't come downtown. People were saying that it was like a bomb went off. This is part of the bomb signs that God is overlapping here that are pointing to the upcoming bomb that God is predicting to occur in Manhattan, New York City on July 25th. Anyway, also Harris, in his signs, Harris County, Houston, is being used in God's signs to point to the coming crash of Kamala Harris in a plane, which will lead to her replacement with the Antichrist, Barack Obama. Okay, so there's all kinds of overlap there, right? But I just want to focus on the 45 here to establish how the date May 17th was in fact correct when I said in this video that you're about to listen to that Jimmy Carter would die on May 17th. I was not incorrect. It was in fact 100% correct because the analysis, the signs confirmed all of the analysis. Okay? And if you are skeptical, then, well, the prediction 45 days later after May 17th will prove it. So, and again, May 17th was 39 days after the eclipse, and Jimmy Carter's the 39th president, but that's why. But also the reason for 39 is that the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth, and it connects to James Earl Jones, who will die on July 5th, which is 39 days before the predicted solar flare from the sun that will knock out the power grid. And a reminder that before it was believed that Jimmy Carter would die on May 17th, 2024, it was believed that this would be the date that James Earl Jones would die, May 17th, 2024. Okay, so I think I've explained it enough here. It's amazing if you think about it too. Scott Scheffler, the prophetic sign here, he's from Dallas, and he had just won the Masters prior to this. And one of the signs in that was that he spoke to the camera to his wife saying, I'm coming home now. So he's telling his pregnant wife that he's coming home, in other words, Dallas. So Dallas, in other words, was a part of the signs in the Masters sign, which was just prior to this. So he's from Dallas, and the I-45 connects to the other sign that happened later in the day in Houston with the storm. By the way, it was a derecho storm. It was a type of windstorm that's very rare, and it has these exceeding wind speeds, but it's a straight line storm because it's named after the punch. That's a type of punch in boxing. That's a straight punch. And anyway, that's not the first derecho sign that God has used. He's used the derecho storm in Nashville and in Ottawa, Canada, after the truckers because of their straight line convoy across Canada. But that's another story. So anyway, he's from Dallas. His sign was the first thing in the morning, and then the storm was later down the I-45. That alludes to 45 days after May 17th. Okay, so I think it's firmly established now why 45 days after the signs that on May 17th were thought to be we thought that Jimmy Carter would die on this day. Instead, we received these signs that revealed 45 days. Of course, this isn't by far the only way in which we learned or confirmed that July 1st will be the date that is predicted that Jimmy Carter will die. There's all kinds of other confirmation, but this was the initial way in which the date July 1st was first looked at. At first I thought it might be the date that Kamala Harris would die in a plane crash, because of course the storm 45 days, for I-45 after the Dallas golfer, and it's in Harris, and it's destruction, right? So it's falling from the sky too. In fact, it is a sign pointing to Kamala Harris's death. It's just that her death will be 7 + 7 + 7 days after the death of Jimmy Carter on July 22nd. And that's, okay, so in other words, Jimmy Carter's death is a step in the trail of signs leading to Kamala Harris's death. And that's why another reason for the storm in Harris County, which is truly a Kamala Harris death by the air sign, because the windows crashed from the air and the storm is by air, and her plane is going to crash due to wind. Turbulence and a lightning strike is going to bring her plane down. God has communicated that. And so that's perfect. So you would think that 45 days later would be the death of Kamala Harris. But upon further investigation with other connections and other prophetic signs, because it's a big picture of signs, sifting it out like a puzzle, the pieces, fitting them together, it's Jimmy Carter that will die on July 1st, 7 + 7 + 7 days before the death of Kamala Harris. And Carter was inaugurated in 77. Kamala Harris is the 49th vice president, and 49 is 7 times 7. And she will die 7 + 7 + 7 days after the death of the president that became the president in 77. Also, God is pointing to the date July 6th as the predicted date for Jimmy Carter's funeral. All right, now I have explained how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. They are interconnected signs that produce trails of signs through which God is telling very important stories and revealing knowledge. This is the reason for the elaborate big picture of signs. It is through the connections of these signs and these trails of signs that God is able to communicate very important information and knowledge and wisdom that must be learned. There are 10 other videos on this channel with the titles predicting that James Earl Jones will die on May 17th. They must be watched. There is very important information and stories that God is telling being told in these videos. When the prediction comes to pass, it should be clear that all of the videos need to be watched. If you only watch the videos in which it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die on July 5th, and not the videos that predict that James Earl Jones will die on May 17th, you will have missed very important information that God is telling. All right, welcome to the explanation for this diagram, which is truly one of the most amazing things ever. This diagram, well, let me just begin with how the fact that James Earl Jones in God's signs is extremely important. As one friend put it, he's like a reverent figure, if you will. The symbolism involved with James Earl Jones is the reason why he is so important in God's signs. It has been recognized since the summer of 2019 that the day that James Earl Jones will die will be a massive prophetic sign. And over the years, the information that God has developed regarding this theme of James Earl Jones has increasingly made this conviction, further confirmed this conviction, how important James Earl Jones is. And along the way, it has been discovered and learned the deeper reasons for this. And a lot of this will be explained through God's big picture of signs, which is being illustrated here with this diagram. And so the introduction in this video explained this connection right here, this exact 415 months connection from the date of the 1989 World Series earthquake, which, as I mentioned, James Earl Jones began the broadcast. The opening of the broadcast of this Game 3 began with James Earl Jones reading the poem, the prophetic poem, at the opening of the broadcast, followed 4 minutes after his reading of the poem with the earthquake that knocked out the power in the broadcast booth. All right, now, where to begin? The reason why the power went out in the broadcast booth right after James Earl Jones read the poem is related to how James Earl Jones is the voice of the Lion King. And as I mentioned, God is using this as a metaphor in his signs for the coming solar flare that will knock out the power grid. That's why James Earl Jones, for example, he will die on July 5th, right here in the diagram, at the age of 93, 39 days, which hints at 93, or rather 93 hints at 39, to the date that the sun, which is 93 million miles away from Earth, will erupt with a solar flare that will knock out the power grid. Okay, now James Earl Jones is king symbolism, and the King of Kings was crucified on the 3rd hour of the day and was taken down on the 9th hour of the day, which is 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. And that's also the reason for this number of 93 and 39. And as I explained in the James Earl Carter videos, Jimmy Carter, James Earl Jones's death is prophetically connected to the predicted death of James Earl Carter, Jimmy Carter, on July 1st. And Jimmy Carter was the 39th president for this symbolic purpose as well. Now, James Earl Jones read the poem that was written by the 7th Commissioner of Baseball, and James Earl Jones was born 7 years and 77 days prior to the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball, because it hints at the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua regarding the Israelites and their enacting a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment, which will be the case when the solar flare knocks out the power grid. But what is interesting is that the 7th Commissioner of Baseball was born 726 days after astronomers observed, while at an international astronomy convention, highly unusual sunspot activity on the surface of the sun that climaxed with what is reported as, quote unquote, a quite perfect crucifix. The 7th Commissioner of Baseball was born exactly 726 days before this date, after this date, in 1936, which was April 8th. And the 726 days hints at the 726th word in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word that means rapture, which, for those who don't know what that is, it is Christianity's most preposterous idea, but it is clearly in Scripture that God's faithful will disappear prior to his second coming. They will not go through the tribulation. However, there will be 2 raptures. Anyway, the first one will be the day of the first fruits rapture will be the day of August 13th, the day of the solar flare. And that's also contained, or the reason for the king symbolism, the return of the King of Kings. And jumping ahead, we will get to what I have titled this diagram, if you could title it something, the return of the king. But the day of the quite perfect crucifix on the surface of the sun connects profoundly to other signs in God's big picture of signs, which I can't really get into here. except to say that it was exactly 30,000 days before the extremely prophetic Pentecost in 2018, at the end of a uncanny trail of signs that paralleled the timing of events in the book of Joshua that climaxed on Pentecost, which was the day that the walls fell on Jericho. But that date, April 8th, 1936, was exactly 88 years before a solar eclipse, the extremely prophetic solar eclipse on April 8th, 2024. 88 years because this hints at Jesus, whose number in Greek gematria equals 888. The name Jesus in Greek gematria equals 888. But this is also why James Earl Jones reprised his role as the voice of the Lion King at the age of 88, which was released in July of 2019. And as I mentioned a minute ago, it has been known since then that the death of James Earl Jones would at some point be a massive prophetic sign. In the Bible, 30 years is king symbolism, and exactly 30 years after the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball was the death of Martin Luther King Jr., who died in Memphis, Tennessee, right near the king of rock and roll's Graceland estate. Martin Luther King Jr. died exactly 4 + 4 years before the date that the king of home runs, the home run king, Hank Aaron, player number 44, which is hinted at with the exact 4 + 4 years, tied the former home run king's home run title, Babe Ruth, on the date 4/8. No, I'm sorry, he beat Babe Ruth's home run title on the date 4/8. Player number 44 tied Babe Ruth's home run record on the date 4/4. And actually, the date 4/4, when player number 44 tied the home run king's record, was exactly 4 + 4 years after Martin Luther King was murdered on the date 4/4. In Tennessee, the 16th state, which is 4 × 4, near the estate of the king of rock and roll. Now, that date 4/4 in 1968 was exactly 30 years after the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball on the date 4/4. I apologize, I was incorrect earlier. I got it confused because the quite perfect crucifix on the sun occurred on the date 4/8. So anyway, the reason for mentioning this 30-year period will be apparent later in this video. Well, no, actually, I take that back. It actually will be in another video. But that's because a James Earl Jones sign on September 1st, 2019, 9/1 in the year 19, a massive 9/11 number that hints at 9/11, was the 30th anniversary of the death of Bartlett Giamatti, the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. On that day, September 1st, 2019, the Washington Nationals baseball team jokingly held up 2 of their players for the Simba Cam, which is when in a stadium, fans in the stadium will hold up their dog or their baby for the camera to focus in on and show everyone else in the stadium on the big screen. It's called the Simba Cam. And Simba is the main character in the movie The Lion King, in which James Earl Jones starred as the king, Mufasa. And the 2 players that were held up in the Washington Nationals Simba Cam story, which was a national sports news story, were only 2 players, and it was player number 2 and 22. And that's because George Washington, as in the Washington Nationals baseball team, was born on the date 2/22. And it is through the 9/11 events that God pointed to George Washington, as explained many other times in other videos. On this same day as the Simba Cam was the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon National Park in southwest Kenya, which is the location that inspired the movie The Lion King. 7 people died. This was on the 30th anniversary of the death of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball. And if I failed to mention, the reason for the 30 years significance is that in the Bible, 30 years symbolizes a king. King David and Joseph were made kings at the age of 30 years old, which is why Martin Luther King died 30 years after the 7th Commissioner of Baseball, and this 30 years anniversary on September 1st. But at the same time that 7 people died in the flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, the location that inspired the movie The Lion King, Pope Francis, the first of the 2 Antichrist kings, was 7 minutes late for Mass due to a power outage at the Vatican. He was stuck in an elevator. The Washington Nationals that year went on to win the World Series for the first time in their 50-year franchise history, and their franchise began in Montreal. Montreal is French for Royal Mount, which hints at the Lion King, if you know the movie. This Simbacam baseball story and this flash flood in Hell's Gate Canyon, these Lion King signs, and the Washington Nationals going on to win for the first time in 50 years, these signs on September 1st, 2019 were 50 days exactly after the flood backstage of the theater that hosts the movie The Lion King in the Manhattan blackout on July 13th, 2019. That blackout was a power outage, and it caused a flood that ruined the costumes of the theater or the musical The Lion King, and the musical The Lion King is all about its costumes. It was a news story because the performers had to perform for a number of days without costumes, and how in the world can you do The Lion King without costumes? And so that power outage in the blackout occurred right as the sun set perfectly in between the canyon walls of the skyscrapers in Manhattan. This happens only twice annually, and it is called Manhattanhenge. The blackout occurred exactly during Manhattanhenge. In Genesis 1:14, the Lord tells us that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, first and foremost. The 2 brightest, the sun is a light in the sky, and this was a prophetic sign. It occurred during Manhattanhenge. During this time also was the 4.0 rare earthquake in Manhattan, Montana, that occurred exactly 9 months and 11 days after the swarm of earthquakes began there. I go into this to further confirm the Lord's signs pointing to the coming power outage caused by the lion's roar, which is why all of this ties through James Earl Jones, and in this case, the movie The Lion King. But regarding the Royal Mount, the Lord came down on Mount Sinai, and then after their rebellion at Mount Sinai, 3,000 Israelites were killed in response to their rebellion. That is why the Manhattan blackout and the flood backstage of the movie The Lion King, or the theater that hosts the musical The Lion King, was exactly 3,000 days after the deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history, on the same day that Barack Obama released his long-form birth certificate in digital format only, finally, and that was later discovered to be, through forensic analysis that was done by the sheriff of the 6th biggest county in the U.S., Phoenix, who sent or rather hired 2 independent forensic labs in Europe so as to avoid any sense of bias, which later resulted in concluding that there were 9 obvious points of forgery. It was a clearly layered document that was a forged document. But just after that, 3 days later, Barack Obama at the White House press correspondence dinner made a joke while telling the biggest lie in history, or maybe the second to biggest lie after the shoplifted referendum, which is that he was born at the scene of the clip of the Simba cam, or the Simba. The iconic scene of the movie The Lion King is when baby Simba is lifted up for everyone to see on the Royal Mount, the Temple Mount, or symbolism for the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And Barack Obama played a clip of this during his comedic speech, as the presidents do during these White House press correspondence dinners. He played a clip of the Simba cam and said that this was the scene of his birth. This was right after he released his long-form birth certificate on the day of the deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. This was also the day of the death of the famous street evangelist preacher David Wilkerson, who famously started the Times Square church. And exactly 3,000 days later was the blackout in Times Square where his church is. And that's because the 3,000 is not only, it was quote unquote about 3,000 souls that perished after their rebellion at Mount Sinai. And that's why on 9/11 it was 2,996 deaths officially, about 3,000. That's why the 3,000 days from the death of David Wilkerson to the blackout at his church that he founded in Times Square. All right, I just had some lunch. I was a little bit low on blood sugar, and I had some lunch, and I'm ready to get going here and explain the rest of this truly astounding, most beautiful diagram, one of the most beautiful things ever. All right, this big picture of James Earl Jones signs. And again, we have this key date, which is the 1989 World Series earthquake. I could, in fact, explain more about the prophetic significance of this. I will, but it is also explained in detail in other videos. So I'm not going to, explain everything. What I need to tell you is that I think it would be the smart thing to do once the prediction comes to pass is to watch every video on this channel. And then you'll get the big picture. But not only that, the other videos contain extremely important information. So it is necessary to watch all of the videos. That's the point of the prediction from God. It is to get you to watch all of the videos in order to learn the information that God is communicating, the knowledge and wisdom that is communicated through his big picture of signs that is necessary. All right, now, this key date here is an astounding exact 170 months before the release of the movie Return of the King, the third installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy movies. Okay, Return of the King was released on this date, December 17th, 2003. You'll notice here that we have a number of dates that occurred on the 17th of the month. This is how God has connected all of this to James Earl Jones, who is predicted to die after this date here. This date, as you can see in this diagram, was very important. It was, if you will, a penultimate step in the trail of signs leading to his predicted death on July 5th. This was also a 17th of the month. One reason for the significance of 17 is that it points to prophecy regarding the kings in the book of Revelation. The Antichrist, which is the seventh and eighth, arguably, kings in the 17th chapter of Book of Revelation, this Antichrist is also described with the metaphor of a beast that has 7 heads and 10 horns, for which the number 17 symbolizes. Also, James Earl Jones, and him being king symbolism, again, he was the voice of the Lion King, played King Jaffe Jaffer in the movie Coming to America. He read the James Earl Jones audiobook. James Earl Jones reads the King James Bible. I should say James Earl Jones reads the King James Bible. And he was the voice of Darth Vader, Antichrist king symbolism. Now, the Antichrist will be defeated at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ on the 10th day of the 7th month, for which the number 17 also symbolizes. And the Temple Mount is symbolic of James Earl Jones, one reason being him starring in the movie The Lion King, which, as I mentioned earlier, is about a particular mountain, a royal mountain, Temple Mount. Right? Again, I mentioned this earlier, Montreal, which is French for Royal Mount. Okay, so that's the one reason for the significance of the number 17, and I'll elaborate more in a minute because of Revelation chapter 17. In fact, we're getting to that right now, actually, because this is the reason for the exact 170 months from the day that James Earl Jones read the poem to begin the broadcast that then led to the earthquake. 170 months exactly after was this 17th of the month in December of 2003, the release of the Return of the King. Okay, now James Earl Jones is king symbolism. James Earl Jones' poem that he read, Bartlett Giamatti's poem, the 7th Commissioner of Baseball's poem, was about how baseball is a metaphor for a homecoming. Immediately after James Earl Jones read the poem, the ABC broadcast played the song by James Taylor, Hello, Old Friend. And then the earthquake struck. This is because of the return of the king that is being hinted at, the return of Lord Jesus Christ. By the way, the stadium that the game was played in was the prophetic stadium, because it's been used in God's signs in other instances for this purpose. The name of it, the name of the baseball stadium in San Francisco, was Candlestick Park. And that hints at the candlesticks in the temple on the Temple Mount in ancient Israel. The menorah, the candlesticks that were lit inside the temple. That's why, for example, the prophetic sign involving the San Francisco 49ers in 2011, I believe it was December. If I recall, it was December 11th. But that was the day of the prophetic power outage during the Monday night nationally televised football game. Now, I forget the details, but the point is that the power went out twice. It was uncanny how it went out twice, in fact. And from what I remember, they never discovered the reason. Well, that's because the reason was from God. God was demonstrating the candles being out in the Temple Mount. This actually gets back to after Jesus was crucified by the Jews, the leaders in Jerusalem, that were the religious leaders that were lighting the candles in the temple. It is recorded in history that after Jesus was crucified, the candles in the temple could not remain lit. They would, after being lit by the priests, would be snuffed out. They would immediately go out. The menorah could not remain lit. This was one of these strange occurrences that happened during the years between Jesus' crucifixion and the Romans destroying Jerusalem in 70 AD. Okay, so that was one of the things. Another thing is that the door to the Temple Mount would continue to remain open. They couldn't close it, which signified Jesus having left and not being there. So, so the point for getting into all of that is the prophetic sign regarding Candlestick Park, in order to confirm for you the significance of the Temple Mount and James Earl Jones symbolizing this, and the return of the king. Because when Jesus departed, after the Jews rejected him, history ends at the end of the age when they accept him again, because as Jesus said, he wouldn't return until the gospel had gone around the world and the Jews call out for him by his name, which Zechariah chapter 12 in the Bible says, prophecy says that this is what they will do in their hour of greatest need, when the world is ganged up, ready to destroy Jerusalem and Israel, with their armies gathered on the plains of Megiddo, which is where we get the name Armageddon. And so that's the return of the king at the end of the age, and that's why it's relevant with the Candlestick Park connection here. So, and again, the Temple Mount is symbolized by the number 17 because, as I explained, the big day on the Temple Mount is the Day of Atonement, the 10th day of the 7th month. And that's why we have this exact 170 months from this prophetic sign, which both of these dates are the 17th of the month. But this was Candlestick Park, no less. Okay, and we're talking about the return of the king, the returning after he departed, and why the door wouldn't remain closed and the menorah could not remain lit. Okay, the thing is, this is when I first discovered this, I got a little bit emotional, actually, to be honest. This exact 170 months connects to the release date of the movie The Return of the King, which was a huge movie. It made $1.1 billion and won a record 14 Oscar awards, a record tying. It tied, I believe, if I recall, Ben-Hur, another movie that points to Jesus. But it had a record 11 Oscars, made 1.1, which obviously hints at 11. And this was exactly 170 months after the 1989 World Series earthquake at Candlestick Park. All right, so I hadn't looked at the sign in a long time. The power outage, it went out twice, and the second time was in the second quarter. The first time was in the first quarter. So there was another two. It hints at the second coming. Forgot that. And during the game was Colin Kaepernick, number 7, a player that God has used in his signs before. He kneeled, he kneeled, actually, just might as well say it. He kneeled for the first, he was the inspiration for the Black Lives Matter kneeling protests in June of 2020 that were anti-Christ. And so he kneeled symbolically for the first time on September 1st, 2016, exactly 36 months before the Simbacam and the kneeling sign on September 1st, 2019 that I explained earlier. Anyway, 36 since it's 666. And because 36 is 6 times 6, and also 2 times 18, which is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and also the 36th triangular number, which is the number which in a triangle of numbers, in the 36th row, the last number is 666, and 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way up to 36 equals 666. Colin Kaepernick is being used in God's signs because of Nick, one of countless signs involving Nick, including men named Nick, to point to the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. And Nick, for example, means ruling over the laity. That's the Greek origin of this word. Jesus said he hates the Nicolaitans and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And that's why the Pope, the first of the two Antichrists, is the ultimate Nicolaitan, although pastors are also Nicolaitans, and they preach the Nicolaitan doctrine, which is sovereign grace and Calvinism in the evangelical church. But the ultimate Nicolaitan is Pope Francis, Pope Francis. That's why the San Francisco 49ers, led by player number 7, Colin Kaepernick, at this time during this prophetic sign. All right. So I just want to say that I just discovered that the date that it occurred, December 19th, 2011, is exactly 666 weeks before 9/23 in 2024. This will be 19 days before the second coming. It'll be 6 plus 6 plus 6 days after the second of the two raptures on September 5th. So this is the first time being aware of 9/23, 2024, and incidentally, it will be exactly 7 years. Speaking of Colin Kaepernick, number 7, it'll be exactly 7 years after the rapture sign was fulfilled in the night sky. Revelation chapter 12, the sign in the night sky that's described was fulfilled on that date exactly 7 years before this. So I think we can safely assume that the date 9/23, 2024 will be quite significant and therefore likely will involve the Temple Mount, given the connection to the Candlestick Park, just days before the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. But I have only looked at this for like literally 1 minute. And so I haven't investigated any connections other than this in God's big picture of signs to 9/23, 2024. Just putting it out there. All right, now, so the reason for why this is so amazing, and why, like I said, I got a little emotional when it was discovered, is because this 17, or rather 117 months, which hints at the number 17, to the date, the 17th of the month, to the 1.1 billion and 11 Oscars movie, is that it hints at Revelation 17:11. This is the passage in Bible prophecy that speaks of the kings. It speaks of the 5th and 7th and 8th kings. The language God has used here is quite something. It's beautiful. God has designed the language in that prophecy, in this verse, for a purpose. One is to give us the number 58, because it speaks of 5 kings that have fallen, the message being given to John, the author of the book of Revelation. 5 kings that have fallen, one that is, and a 7th that is coming, and then an 8th that is of the 7 kings, but isn't. Okay, and the 8th king. Okay, before I jump ahead to the 8th king. So, but by doing this, by giving us this language, he gives us a number 5 to work with. And so it's 5 out of 8 kings. All right, so that's why Pope Francis, and the earthquake in San Francisco, for that matter, was elected Pope exactly 85 years. Right here. Okay, so it's not in this diagram, actually. The Pope was elected exactly 85 years. Pope Francis was elected exactly 85 years after the collapse of the San Francisco Dam in Los Angeles in, I believe, 1928, if I've done my math there. So, and that was one of the biggest disasters in U.S. history. So, anyway, dams obviously are collapsed. Dams are obviously judgment from God. A dam is symbolic of holding back the evil forces. It's symbolic of protection. And a collapsed dam would signify the removal of that protection from God. And so we have the Antichrist being elected exactly 85 years. And this is part of this pattern that God has established involving the number 58 and 85 to point to the prophecy about the 5 kings and then the 7th and 8th kings. Okay? Now, in this diagram here, Pope Francis was born exactly 85 years before this date, which I'll get to in a second. But also, just for example, Super Bowl 58, the most recent Super Bowl, involved the San Francisco 49ers. That was another sign that pointed to Pope Francis, in other words, in the 36th state. And I just explained how 36 is symbolic of 666. But there's lots more to that, which is explained in other videos. So, that's, anyway, the reason why this is so amazing here, because we have this return of the king sign, and it's in context of what is being hinted at, which is Revelation 17:11 about the kings. Okay, now to elaborate more about the kings, the seventh king. So Rome was founded on 7 kings. It's basic history that the foundation of Rome began after the 7th king. And the legend goes that they were tired of having kings, and then this begat the Empire of Rome with its early form of democracy. Okay, so regardless of the legend, it's widely accepted as historical fact that the 7 kings ended in 509 BC, which is a number that hints at the number 17, because 59 is the 17th prime number. But also 59 is the 7th superprime number, because 17 is the 7th prime number. Okay, so the 7th superprime number gives us the 7 kings. Also, the end of the 7 kings occurred in 509 BC, which is hinting at the 7th superprime number. Not only that, but there's all kinds of other prophecy, in fact, in that chapter as well, that clearly identifies Rome, because it's the city of 7 hills, which is Rome is known for, and the scarlet and red colors, which of course is the colors of the cardinals and their garb, and on and on. I don't want to make this video into about how clear it is that Rome and the Pope are being described in Bible prophecy. It's actually a crying shame how this knowledge has been lost. There wouldn't have been a Reformation had the Reformers not had this knowledge that the Pope is the Antichrist, because it is clear from Bible prophecy. But that's all related to the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, which has the majority of Christians interpreting 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 as what is holding back the Antichrist as the Holy Spirit. But that's absurd. It doesn't make any sense. Paul was talking about Rome, which is why he spoke cryptically and spoke of it as being a he and a what. Because anyone in possession of his letters would have been in danger because he was identifying Rome. The removal of the he and the what, which he said the Thessalonians knew exactly what he was talking about, so why didn't he just say the Holy Spirit, is because he was cryptically talking about it for their safety, because they already knew what he was talking about. But the he and the what is not the Holy Spirit. It was Constantine, the emperor, moving the what, the capital, to Constantinople, thus paving the way or opening the way for the bishops of Rome to rise in power. And it's always been the case that the blasphemous office of papacy is the apostasy talked about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The Antichrist is first apostate and only then political from his seat of apostasy, his power in the seat of apostasy, which is, of course, the Pope. Now, the Pope and the Vatican were the head of the empire. They had the temporal powers as well as the religious spiritual authority until Napoleon stripped their power, and then they were not. Which is what I mean by that is the prophecy, because the prophecy says that this beast, the 8th king, is the beast that was, is not, and will be again. And people will marvel how it came about again, how it will be that Rome will be the political seat of power in the Western civilization again, soon. And that's the 8th king, because the 8th king isn't a king as it says, it's a beast that the 7th king is riding, the prostitute. The 7th king is Pope Francis riding the beast, which is the other Western nations giving the Vatican and Rome their power. It's also spoken of that in the prophecy too, about the 10 kings that give the beast its power for a short period. Okay, so anyway, all of this is alluded to with this number 58, but also here, and 85, but also this 117 months connected to the Return of the King movie and the 1.1 billion and 11 Oscars. All right. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, it's from the release of the movie, The Return of the King, exactly 6 plus 6 plus 6 years. That's Antichrist. So that's just more confirmation that what I have just explained is correct, that this is alluding to the Antichrist in Revelation 17:11. So it's 6 plus 6 years plus 6 years, but also this is the equivalent of 6 times 6 times 6 months, which is another second witness to that. And that gets us to the return, as in the return of the king, the return of Comet Leo. Now, Leo, the constellation, is the king constellation because the lion is royalty. And James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King. That's what makes this a Lion King James Earl Jones sign. The return of Comet Leo was discovered by the man named Leo. And, one thing that he said about it was that it was leaving the solar system at 44 miles per second. And that hints at the 44th president. The other Antichrist, the second of the two Antichrists that gets his power from the first of the two Antichrists, Pope Francis. Okay, the false prophet equivalent, because the second of the two beasts is also named the false prophet, and it's a shame that so many Christians are confused about this. They, having not studied superficially even the prophecies and how clear they are about it being Rome, they've deduced that because of the name prophet, that the second of the two Antichrists must be therefore a religious leader and therefore Pope Francis. It's incorrect. So, now the comet Leo that was leaving the solar system at 44 miles per second also returned to the solar system after 40 plus 40,000 years. It was literally 80,000 years and a couple years above 80,000. So it was basically 80,000 years exactly. And that's hinting at 40 plus 40, another second witness to the 44th president being the Antichrist, the second of the two Antichrists. Now, the reason for this particular date, because obviously a comet doesn't spend only one day in the solar system before leaving again, this was the day that and God uses records for his signs. This was the day of the record closest cometary conjunction with the planet Venus. And in Bible prophecy, Venus is said by Jesus to symbolize him. And so we have this return of the comet Leo, return of the king comet, in other words, that connects with the Return of the King movie. We have the return of the King of Kings being symbolized here. Also, the constellation Leo is heavily involved in what was the Star of Bethlehem in the night sky in 2 BC. All right, that's another story though. All right, so Comet Leo is symbolic for this, but also in the Bible, the planet Venus is associated with the Antichrist. So there's double symbolism here. And like I just explained, we have the Antichrist symbolism in this comet too, and furthermore, it's exactly 6 plus 6 plus 6 years after the Return of the King movie, which is not only symbolism for the return of the King of Kings, Lord Jesus Christ, as in Lord of the Rings, Lord Jesus Christ, but also, as I explained, symbolic of the Antichrist king. Okay, so there's overlapping symbolism. So one really needs a mind for symbolism and abstraction to be able to discern God's big picture of signs. Those that interpret Bible prophecy, for example, too literally, like Chuck Missler, for example, they wouldn't be able to discern God's big picture of prophetic signs, which is why, by the way, he and his organization came against the Revelation chapter 12 sign that was fulfilled in the night sky on 9/23 in 2017. Not to put down Chuck Missler, who I admire, I just want to make it, I just want to say that he would often say he would often advise interpreting prophecy more literally than symbolically, but the opposite is true. All right, now, James Earl Jones, when he read the poem, it was about a homecoming, okay? And right as the earthquake struck, okay, so after he read the poem was about baseball being a homecoming, was the song Hello Old Friend, which also hinted at the return of Jesus. And then the broadcasters, Al Michaels, who God has used in his signs, including this one, and other signs as well. It's amazing. Al Michaels hints at the Archangel Michael. And that's why Al Michaels, for example, was the part of the was the sign, in fact, of the miracle on ice, the highest moment in American sports history, when he yelled, "Do you believe in miracles? Yes!" exclamation mark, as the time expired on the clock and the Americans beat the Soviets. Well, anyway, Al Michaels and his partner there in the broadcast booth were talking about the highlights from the previous two games. And right when the earthquake struck and the power went out in the broadcast booth was when Jose Canseco was crossing home plate. Jose Canseco wears jersey number 33, and in the video, it's on the front of his jersey, and you can clearly see it. It's very prominent, this number 33 on the screen, right as the power goes out, and there's white noise, etc. The screen blanking out as it would in the old days when everything wasn't digital, and but the screen switches from Jose Canseco to the white noise and then the blackness right as he is on the screen. Okay, and he at that time is crossing home plate. So it's a homecoming. All right. Now, right before that, the reason why Jose Canseco was crossing home plate is because of a hit that was hit into the outfield and bounced off the outfield wall, where the ball hit right next to the 330-foot marker on the wall. Okay, so the outfield wall at Candlestick Park had on it a 330-foot mark. Okay, so in other words, the ball went 330 feet, in other words, as well. That's what enabled Jose Canseco to come around the bases and cross home plate. Player number 33. Okay, now Jesus was crucified when he was 33 years old and was resurrected, conquered death at the age of 33. All right, and so we were talking about the homecoming of Jesus, the return of Jesus. But that's why we have this connection here, which is this exact 333 months to this extremely prophetic date. This is a date that coincides with that is part of a parallel of dates and signs that with the most central prophecy in the Bible, Daniel chapter 9, which speaks of the rebuilding of Jerusalem. The decree to rebuild Jerusalem after the Jews recaptured East Jerusalem in 1967. On April 1st, 1969, the Knesset passed the decree to rebuild Jerusalem. And in the prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, there is a period of 49 years. And it's exactly 49 biblical years from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 1969. And what do I mean by a biblical year is 12 months of 30 days each, a prophetic year. So 49 exact years later is this date. This date in the prophecy after the 49 years is followed by one period of 7 years. This, in other words, date here, July 17th, 2017, was one of a number of symbolic beginnings of the final 70th seven. Many people that know a thing or two about Bible prophecy know and are expecting a beginning of the final seven, the 70th seven. It already began in 2017. This was known in 2017, It has been known since then, and all of God's big picture of science has confirmed this since then. And when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove this. This is the reason, the purpose for this prediction that is from God. Make no mistake. I know far better than you the reason why and how, or the reason why the purpose of this prediction from God. It is to prove these controversial things, especially, if you will, the date of the second coming, October 12th, 2024. Because the center of the web, of the interconnected web of prophetic signs, which, by the way, cannot be fully understood, any of the prophetic signs, without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, which is only being explained on this channel. The center of the web of connections is the Day of Atonement, the second coming. And therefore, the prediction will prove that this is God's true big picture of signs that focuses in on and centers on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Okay? And so this date here, that's the reason for this prophetic sign. This was the day that Jews were able to pray openly on the Temple Mount for the first time in 19 centuries. Prior to this, because of the Temple Mount and the agreement between the Jews and the Jordanians, and them, the Jordanians, having symbolic control of the Temple Mount, authority over the Temple Mount, Jews aren't allowed to pray on the Temple Mount, not even before taking a sip of water. But this occurred a few days after terrorism on the Temple Mount, and during and after this moment of chaos, Jews ascended the Temple Mount on this date and prayed for the first time, July 17th and 17. Now, this is also symbolic of the rapture because the ark is lifted up above the earth in Genesis 7:17. And it's high above the earth. And the Temple Mount is the Temple Mount because of its elevation above the rest of Jerusalem. So, okay, now in Bible prophecy, a period of 42 months is mentioned 7 times regarding the Antichrist and his rule. And by the way, again, we are already well inside the final 42 months, which began on May 1st and 2nd, 2021, and the signs on that date confirmed this, which I've explained in other videos many times. Okay, so exactly 42 months, though, after this extremely prophetic date, as I've just explained now. And by the way, this is also the day of one of the earthquakes in the earthquake tetrad, which was also part of a symbolic beginning of the final 7. But anyway, okay. So exactly 42 months. The earthquake tetrad, by the way, was 4 earthquakes in a row that were 7.0 or greater, with no 7.0 or greater earthquakes in between, spaced at 177 days exactly apart. And that's the same spacing of blood moons in a blood moon tetrad, if you know what I'm talking about. Now, also 177, as in the 177 days in which the earthquakes are spaced, and this was the third of the 4 earthquakes spaced by 177 days, 177 also hints at Genesis 7:17, and the date 7:17 for that matter. That's why it's amazing that one of the earthquakes that were 177 days apart landed on the date 7:17. Okay, now exactly 42 months later, which is again this number that symbolizes the period of the Antichrist, and it is only symbolic because we were already in this final symbolic 42 months, was the day of James Earl Jones's 90th birthday, which he celebrated in the 11th state. This obviously hints at the warning of judgment for America on 9/11, but also Revelation 9:11, which speaks of a king, King Abaddon, the king of destruction, as it says in Revelation 9:11. And again, James Earl Jones is king symbolism. He also was the voice of Darth Vader, which is Antichrist king symbolism, or if you will, King Abaddon symbolism. Right? Okay, now his 90th birthday is exactly 11 months. That's another 9 and 11 to the return of the comet Leo, which is again, as I explained, a James Earl Jones sign. Okay, so you have also up here this 90 years and 11 months from James Earl Jones's birth in the diagram. That's a 9/11 right there. To the return of the comet Leo, James Earl Jones sign. All right, now, I have already explained how Revelation 17:11 is about the prophecy about 5 kings that have passed, fallen, and then the 8th king and the 7th and 8th kings, which is why for symbolic purposes, God uses the number 58 and 85 as symbolism for this. That's the reason, again, for the very creative language that God used to give us the 5. So the 5 kings had fallen, one is. That wasn't necessary, really, in the prophecy. God could have easily communicated 6 and 7, or 6 and 8, whatever, right? But he purposely did 5 and 8 for his purposes in his prophetic signs. Okay, it's beautifully crafted language for this purpose. And that's why, from James Earl Jones's prophetic 90th birthday that he celebrated in the 11th state, it is exactly 5 times 8 months to May 17th, 2024, which I explained at the beginning of this video. This was the day that the Dow Jones, as in James Earl Jones, closed above 40,000 for the first time, and the day of the Scott Scheffler PGA Championship, him being charged with 4 crimes in the 15th state, which hints at 4 and 15, 415, which is why it occurred exactly 415 months after the earthquake in the area code 415. All right, so I explained all that earlier. And that's why this is an amazing confirmation of all of that, of everything that I'm saying, which is that James Earl Jones, these signs connect with exactly 5 times 8 months. Now, I was explaining how the comet and the return of comet Leo was a 9/11 sign, because again, it connects with 11 months from James Earl Jones's 90th birthday, and also connects with this return of the king sign, which gave us the number 11, which is a 9/11 number because it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that struck the North Tower, that of the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state to join the Union in New York City, which is made up of 11 letters. And that's because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God with the 9/11 warning. That's why we have exactly 29 months, because if God were to convey 9/11 symbolism through the use of only 2 numbers, this would be how he would do it, because the number 2 hints at a 1 plus 1. So we have 9/11 and the number 29. But also, the number 29 symbolizes Jesus in that the moon symbolizes Jesus, and the number 29 symbolizes the moon. A lunar cycle is 29 and a half days. The moon symbolizes Jesus because it is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. And also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And this is why watching for the timing of the moon is important in the Bible, and is symbolism for watching for the timing of the Lord's return, which includes prophetic moon signs, including, for example, eclipses. One last connection here, for now, regarding this part of the diagram, connection from the World Series earthquake, is that it is exactly 44 years to this prophetic sign here, October 17th, 2023, when we had a prophecy hint at the prophecy, or rather, we had prophetic signs that hinted at the prophecy in Zechariah 1:17. The earthquake occurred on 10/17, which hints at 117. This 10/17 date in 2023 also hints at 117, as in Zechariah 1:17. This prophecy is a symbolic prophecy because it begins the book of Zechariah, which, as I mentioned earlier, leads to the 12th chapter, in which the Jews finally call for Jesus to save them in their hour of need, as they are about to be annihilated. Well, anyway, in this first chapter in Zechariah, we have a description of 4 horns and 4 craftsmen. This was the day of the errant rocket of Hamas that crashed into one of the hospitals in Gaza, that killed 200 to 300 people in one of the 23 hospitals that serve Gaza and the 2.3 million people in Gaza. All right? That's a bunch of 23s, as we can see. The reason for this is that God pairs 23 and 44 in his signs to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses, as the Bible says is required in order to confirm a matter. And that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And when we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 23 and 44. And the reason why I know this is because I have been studying God's big picture of signs from morning until night for more than full-time hours for over 6 years. And a simple reason, the main reason why, is that the 44th president is also the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played in high school. There's lots more for 23 and 44, however. Now, in the prophecy in Zechariah 1:17, the 4, back to what I was saying about the rocket. Because of the rocket explosion, the planned departure, so it was already planned that Joe Biden would travel to the Middle East to participate in the 4-party summit. Okay, these 4 leaders from the Middle East, the king of Jordan, speaking of kings, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, and a couple others, I forget. So it was the 4 kings, four horns. Okay, so the prophecy is about 4 horns, but in the Bible, a horn is symbolic of a leader, a ruler. So we had the 4 kings sign, in other words, okay? And also on this day, and Joe Biden, and the news came about the cancellation of the 4-party summit right as Joe Biden was boarding his plane to take off for the 4-party summit. Okay, now on the same day, Kamala Harris was on her plane traveling to the Four Corners region of the U.S. She delivered a talk to the university right in Flagstaff, right near the Four Corners. There's many details which are explained in the Gaza explosion video, which I'm forgetting. They're amazing, that confirm so much more and describe so much more meaning to what I'm talking about. I'm just giving you a superficial, quick explanation for how this connects in this diagram, but that's it. You need to watch the Gaza explosion video, and you need to watch all of the videos when the prediction comes to pass, but that's a very important video. Not that any of them aren't. But anyway, she also, on the day that she traveled to the Four Corners region, we had the news from Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is the other Four Corners city. There's really only 2 that are sizable enough to be called cities, Flagstaff and Santa Fe. The news on that day came from Santa Fe that Alec Baldwin would be charged again in the shooting that occurred on the movie set in Santa Fe, on the movie set for the movie Rust. The, forget, Bonanza Creek or something, anyway. So the point is that we had 2 four corners signs to give us a second witness to Kamala Harris on her airplane traveling to the four corners. And that is symbolism for the 4 craftsmen, because she spoke at the university, and the other signs regarding that university and everything confirm all of this, like I mentioned in the other video. And the university is symbolism for craftsmen, because people go to universities to learn a trade, or a craft, if you will. Okay? So, to learn a profession. And that's what is in the Bible prophecy, the 4 professionals, basically. So we had the 4 craftsmen and the 4 horns, symbolic of kings. That's giving us a 4-4, which gives us 44, and that pairs with the 23s that I mentioned. Okay, but that also confirms this 44 years exact connection. All right. Now, in Bible prophecy, the most central one, it speaks of a final period of the Antichrist, and it being symbolized by the number 7, which is why it is exactly 7 months to this May 17th, 2024 date, the date of the signs that I mentioned, the Dow Jones and the Scott Scheffler. But it was also a Pope Francis sign. Whoops, that's important. The big sign of all, which I didn't mention at the beginning, is that this date was the sign involving Pope Francis. This was the day that him and the Vatican announced that only they have the power to, or authority to declare officially supernatural phenomena, such as Mary apparitions. And by the way, if you are a Catholic or a Orthodox Christian or a Muslim, because they revere Mary as well, all Mary apparitions in history have been demons pretending to be Mary. Because this whole Mary worship religion, God hates. If you know God and the Bible, the thing that he hates most is false religious worship, pagan worship, the mixing of paganism with true religion, which is what Catholicism is. The Jews were exiled for this. They were repeatedly judged and chastised by God for mixing with the pagans around them and mixing with their religion, which is exactly Catholicism. Because when Rome converted to Christianity, it did not leave its pagan traditions behind. It just repackaged them in a new wrapper to make it look like Christianity, including the worship of the fertility goddess, Mary. If you look at artwork of the ancient fertility goddesses, such as Isis or Aphrodite, Venus, you see the mother with the baby in her arms, right? It's the same thing. It's fertility goddess worship. There's a human inclination to want to worship the female and fertility and reproduction, and that's paganism, and it's carried over into the worship of Mary. But it's evolved to make it look like Christianity. But anyway, there's going to be a massive Mary apparition, which is why Pope Francis announced on this day, this prophetic day that points to Pope Francis, as I'll explain, because it, for one thing, connects to the San Francisco earthquake with exactly 415 months to the area code 415 and the earthquake in San Francisco. So the big sign was the Pope Francis sign on this day. Now also, he is going to announce that aliens have made him the ambassador for the world, which will give him overnight supreme authority over the leaders of the world. This is how he will become the Antichrist. Through all wicked deception and false signs and wonders, as 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says. Right? Again, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is clearly talking about the Pope, as I explained earlier. So that's why this is so significant. Now, let's see. Pope Francis is the 7th king, which is the reason for the 7 months connection. Now, the big prophetic thing about the earthquake was that it collapsed the bridge, the Bay Bridge, between San Francisco and Oakland. They collapsed a section of it, and this bridge, coincidentally, connected the two cities that were in the World Series. So playing in the World Series were Oakland and San Francisco. What a coincidence. Oh, and by the way, it was Game 3. I forgot. Game 3. Again, 333 months connection to player number 33 crossing the home plate. But it was Game 3 that was interrupted by the earthquake. Forgot that. Now, the bridge is the I-80. So Game 3 I-80 bridge, prophetic sign, hints at 3 8s. And 888 is the equivalent of Jesus in gematria, as I mentioned earlier. Now, this connects to, as I explained, the O.J. Simpson car chase with exactly 56 months. And O.J. was chased up the I-5. And that car chase, the police car chase, interrupted the broadcast of the NBA Finals championship, as I explained earlier. So we have the World Series interruption with the earthquake connecting to the O.J. Simpson, which was an event which was seismic, if you will, in American culture. Really, truly. It was a seismic moment in American culture. O.J. Simpson was a revered person. He was a big star. He was starring in many TV shows, for example, many commercials. The extent of his use in commercials was made a joke in Saturday Night Live once. Anyway, he was a big star, and it was a seismic moment in American culture. Furthermore, it led to the most famous court case in American history, which was also seismic as well. Okay, so, and that interrupted the NBA Finals championship. Okay, and that was because of his chase up the highway of the I-5. So that, okay, now this is part of a sign that's pointing to, because he went, so the chase ended in front of his home in Brentwood, California at 9 p.m., literally, like maybe 1 or 2 minutes after 9 p.m. The day's events began when the Los Angeles Police Department issued the warrant for O.J. Simpson's arrest at 11 a.m. That was a 9/11 sign, all right? Now, this is part of these signs that is communicating the death of Kamala Harris on her way back home, traveling across the country, just like O.J. Simpson traveled up the I-5 to his home in Brentwood, California. Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash in St. Louis on her way home to her $5 million mansion in Brentwood, California. Okay, so that's just, and she is from San Francisco. She was the city attorney for the city of San Francisco. She was born in Oakland. O.J. Simpson was born in San Francisco and was raised and played football for the college in San Francisco. Okay, now, so she is the 49th vice president. O.J. Simpson played for the San Francisco 49ers. All right, so in other words, what I'm doing here is confirming the significance of the I-5 because this pairs with the I-80 bridge, the Bay Bridge that collapsed. That gives us a 5 and an 8, which again is part of this prophecy and these signs that God is communicating to point to Pope Francis as the 7th of the 8 kings, which is a prophecy involving a 5th and an 8th king. So, and again, Pope Francis was elected exactly 85 years after the collapse of the San Francisco Dam in Los Angeles, which is Spanish for the angels, which hints at the fallen angels. And the fallen angels will claim to be demons, or rather will be demons pretending to be aliens, which Pope Francis will announce, which is why this prophetic sign here about Pope Francis having the only sole authority to declare supernatural phenomena. Okay, because he will have the claim to have the authority to announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. And demons will present apparitions that will confirm for the world what Pope Francis is saying. All right? And so that's why the 415 months connection to the San Francisco earthquake and the bridge that collapsed, because the fallen angels will cross over the bridge into the earthly realm. That's what the collapsed bridge's signs are communicating. There's symbolism for this. The crossing over of demons to the earthly realm. Also, by the way, I need to caveat that with how the Bay Bridge collapse also was symbolic of Christ, because because God overlaps symbolism, as I explained, and also bridges symbolize the bridge between man and God, which is Christ. The collapsed bridge signified the collapse of the relationship between America and God. This is why the earthquake was 6.9 in magnitude, because it hints at the 69 weeks in the most central prophecy in the Bible regarding the timing of the arrival of the Lord, Jesus, the Messiah, Christ, in his triumphal entry. And that's why the earthquake occurred 10 miles out in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 10 miles outside of Santa Cruz, California, and Santa Cruz in Spanish is Holy Cross, which is what the bridge symbolizes. The 6.9 earthquake in Santa Cruz, California, collapsed the bridge, the Bay Bridge. Okay. Now, so the bridges signify this. So this gets us into some other things here. Now, O.J. Simpson's car chase up the I-5 was exactly 56 months after the earthquake. In the Bible, the walls of security of Jericho collapsed after a symbolic 3 sets of 7, as I explained earlier. All right, and it was more precisely a 7 and then a 7 times 7, because they marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. And then the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment. All right? This is why also, by the way, on the second plane, it was 56 passengers, and then the towers collapsed. The 110 stories, by the way, and Joshua, who led the Israelites, died at the age of 110. And the Israelites entered the promised land on the date 110 in the Hebrew calendar, which hints at 110. All right, the second coming is hinted at with 2 times 110. That's why 2 towers of 110 stories. It's the second triumphal entry, if you will. That's why 2 110-story towers. All right, now back to the 56 months. This is why the Baltimore Bridge, jumping over here, was 56 feet high. It had a clearance of 56 feet. All right? And the ship that struck the bridge had 56 shipping containers. Okay? And the date that it occurred, 3/26, hints at 26/3, which is how the date is written outside of the US. 26/3, the date, hints at 263, which is the 56th prime number. Just prior to this, at the season opener, the pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles pitched 56 strikes. And that's because in the bridge collapse, 2 times 3 people died, exactly 2 times 3 months after Brooks Robinson died, Mr. Baltimore Orioles. As it was said, there was no player like him that symbolized a professional team. Brooks Robinson played his entire 23-year career, which hints at 2 times 3, in Baltimore. But also, again, the Antichrist wore jersey number 23 in high school. All right, so the bridge and its collapse involved the number 56, as I explained, and the number 56 embeds in it the 7 plus 7 times 7, which is precisely, it is 3 sets of 7, which is what was enacted symbolically when the walls of security of Jericho collapsed. But more precisely, it was a 7 followed by a 7 times 7 because they marched around once per day for 7 days. And then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. And then the walls collapsed in God's judgment. So it was a 7 plus a 7 times 7, just like the number 56. Now, the bridge was built in 77. The bridge was completed in 1977 in the 7th state. That's a 7 and a 7 times 7. That's a 3 sets of 7, but also specifically it's a 7 and a 7 times 7. A 7 and a 77. It was built in the 7th state in 77. Brooks Robinson, Mr. Baltimore Orioles, retired from the Baltimore Orioles after his all-star career of 23 years, Hall of Fame career. He retired in 1977. And at the time that he retired, he was 7th in all-time career hits. He was number 7 on the list of players in terms of number of hits batted in his career. So he retired 7th overall in 77. That's another 3 sets of 7, but it also hints at the significance or the connection between Brooks Robinson and this bridge, which is why he died after his 23-year career, exactly 2 times 3 months before the 2 times 3 deaths in the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore. There are other instances of 3 sets of 7 in regards to Brooks Robinson. I can't remember everything, but I will say that he was known for being the amazing third baseman. And so the amazing, famous third baseman retired as 7th overall in terms of career hits. So that's also in itself a 3 sets of 7, which further confirms his connection to the bridge that was built in the 7th state in 77. Okay, so that's getting us to this Baltimore Bridge. Now, the bridge collapsed 3 days after its anniversary, after it was built. It collapsed just after the 47th anniversary, and the Baltimore Orioles team was purchased by the owner at the age of 47, and the owner died on the 47th anniversary of the bridge in 2024, just days before the bridge collapsed. Okay? Now, 47, because this is a number that God uses to signify or symbolize aliens, because the symbolic UFO alien event in American culture was Roswell. What it was is not relevant. God is using this in his signs regardless. You can have a debate as to whether, well, there's no such thing as aliens, right? Of course. But the Roswell event occurred on the date 4/7 in 47 in the 47th state. And the date 7/4 is written outside the US as 4/7. It hints at 47. So the date 4/7 or 7/4 in 1947, in the 47th state. That's why the number 47 symbolizes aliens. Now, why is that relevant to the bridge? Well, this connects, as I'll explain, to the Pope Francis sign. And again, Pope Francis will announce aliens. Okay? And by the way, the reason why Pope Francis will announce aliens is because it is part of this war that Jesus said he would do in Revelation chapter 2 on the Nicolaitans for their Nicolaitan doctrine and works, which is which ultimately produces a lack of fear of God. The Nicolaitans are the ruling over the laity. That's what the word Nicolaitan means. All right, so I just took a little break. I have been speaking for an hour. What I want to just explain right now is the reason why, well, what I want to explain is important related to the subject of aliens and also Pope Francis. But I hesitate because it isn't only about Pope Francis. When the Lord says in Revelation chapter 2 that he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on the Nicolaitans for their doctrine and their works, he is speaking to mainstream Christianity, believe it or not. And it should be believed, because if you appreciate what Jesus is saying in his teachings, the path is narrow. And he's speaking to Christians when he says this. He's speaking to Christians and saying, many are on the wide road to destruction. The path that leads to life is narrow and hard, and few people find it. Does that describe the 1 point whatever billion Catholics, the few people that find it? Does that describe the millions and millions of Protestant Christians? No, it doesn't. The whole purpose, the primary purpose of the end times is to separate, divide, weed out the true Christians from the non-true Christians, quote-unquote Christians. And that contradicts right away one of the teachings of the Nicolaitans, which is this idea, this theology of being saved past tense, once saved, always saved. That is rooted in Gnosticism, literally. It comes from Augustine. Augustine corrupted the Western Church in the 4th century. Augustine was a Gnostic auditor for the Manichaean sect. He was an official auditor for the Gnostic Manichaean sect for 9 years before he joined the Catholic Church. In his latter writings, his previous Gnosticism influenced him. Gnosticism means, it's rooted in the Greek word knowledge, to know. And the Gnostics believed that they were saved through attaining knowledge, which is uncanny and similar to evangelicals today and once saved, always saved. They will say that you need to hold the precise, correct doctrine, the intellectual belief, in order to be saved. You need to believe, and that's it, but also you need to have the precise, correct doctrine. So if you don't agree with their doctrine, you're not saved, which is wicked deception from Satan, because it prevents them from entertaining any other theology. They, as they're listening to this right now, are squirming in their seats, ready to turn off the video, but they won't, because I've predicted the death of James Earl Jones and Jimmy Carter. And it's from the Lord to finally get their attention, because they will not, because they have been brainwashed, conditioned, I should say, to believe that entertaining any other idea jeopardizes their salvation, because their salvation is dependent on believing intellectually the correct thing, which is absurd, absolutely absurd and wicked deception, and not the Bible, not the teachings of Jesus. It isn't even the teachings of Paul, but these people twist the teachings of Paul, like Peter warned they would. The last warning Peter gave in his writings was to beware of the people that twist the writings of Paul. And that's what today's evangelical church does. The Protestant church does. They twist the writings of Paul. They isolate this or that passage of Paul's to develop their sovereign grace Calvinistic theology. Now, speaking of Augustine and him corrupting the church, Calvin titled his work, his writings, Systematic Augustinianism. Well, first of all, the Bible isn't meant to be studied systematically, like the Western Evangelical Protestant Church does, or the Jehovah's Witnesses do, or they study this, the Bible systematic. The Bible is never meant to be studied systematically. But also Calvin disparaged the other early church fathers that came centuries before Augustine. Calvin disparaged them, never quoted them, only quoted Augustine, even though these other early church fathers knew one of the apostles or knew someone that did and spoke the original Greek. And that's why when you study the writings of the early church fathers in the 1st and 2nd centuries, never will you come to Augustinian theology and once saved, always saved, or sovereign grace, and predestination, predeterminism, which is abhorrent. The idea that God knows beforehand, before people are born, who and who will not choose him and go. Therefore, there isn't even a choice. There's no free will, and that's essentially what the debate comes down to, whether or not we have free will. And in order to entertain sovereign grace, you need to entertain predestination, and they're not truly being free will. And they'll come up with convoluted sayings about how there is still free will when there isn't, just like how Catholics say they're not really worshiping Mary when they are. Okay, it's convoluted nonsense. And so God is very, very, and Luther was an Augustinian monk. So God is extremely displeased with the church, but presently we are in a peak of Calvinism because it waxes and wanes, and it has done so over the last 4 times over the last 500 years because people eventually figure out that it isn't the Bible. But currently we are in a peak of sovereign grace and Calvinistic thinking, and that's perfectly timed for the end times and the Antichrist. But this is what produces the bad fruit coming from the bad tree, that is the modern American church, and ultimately produces this lack of fear of the Lord. And God is seeking those who fear him. And that's why the modern evangelical church is the church of Laodicea, that Jesus said thinks that it is in need of nothing. Because why? They are already saved. Once saved, always saved. I'm just a sinner, saved by faith, as the slogan goes. Well, no, you need to stop sinning, and you will stop sinning if you fear God. And all of this error, whether it be Catholicism or Jehovah's Witness or Seventh-day Adventists or evangelicals, it doesn't matter. It's all a result of the monetization of the church, which Jesus strictly forbid. In fact, the instance in when Jesus got violently angry was when the church leaders of the day, the Pharisees, had monetized his church. But that's exactly what's happening today and has been for centuries. Which is why, because the monetization of the church institutionalized these errors. We wouldn't have Catholicism if it weren't for the money in Catholicism. There wouldn't be Catholicism. The man-centered religion with the hierarchy of men, that is Catholicism, wouldn't exist without these men getting paid by their parishioners, or whatever you call them in Catholicism. But the Reformation, although it discarded many of the pagan traditions of Catholicism, kept intact essentially the Nicolaitan model of church, of assembling, the ruler laity model, where people line up in rows of seats and listen to one man talk for an hour on a stage and perform. He's giving a performance for which he's getting paid for. That's the truth. And it's the equivalent of a socialist dictatorship. because he has complete 100% monopoly on all information. And if you disagree, depending on the denomination you're in, which is most of them, if you disagree with the doctrine of that particular denomination, you'll be asked to leave. This is how these errors get institutionalized with the money, because there wouldn't be pastors or priests or reverends or bishops or popes without money. And that's why Jesus strictly forbid the preaching for money, because he knew it would ultimately lead to the institutionalizing of these errors. And other reasons, such as, like socialist dictatorships, the production of immature non-citizens that are dependent on the state. Well, it's the equivalent in church. And then you have these so-called leaders afraid to give them anything serious because they're quote-unquote not ready for it. But the reason why they're not supposedly ready for it, it comes full circle. It's circular. Is because they're the leaders. Because they're not dependent on their own, independent on their own. Just like people in a socialist totalitarian dictatorship, communism, are dependent on the state and become over time babies, immature, non-citizens. So it's the same thing. And just like socialist dictatorships, they monopolize all of the information so that you depend on the state for your information. And they only give you the one version. There's no discernment. Paul talked about the Bereans who didn't trust anything even the apostles said and verified everything in the scriptures. When do you ever see Christians doing that after the quote-unquote pastor speaks for an hour? Also, Paul said, if the person is speaking while they're assembling and another person is inspired to speak a word, let the person that is speaking be silent. When do you ever see that in church? Right? If you were to do that, if you were to stand up and say, I've got something to say regarding what you're saying there, you'd be immediately escorted out of the building and probably asked never to return. That's how authoritarian it is. Those that are in the supposed so-called freedom movement currently in conservative culture that are going to a church like this are hypocrites. If you are in the freedom movement and you have a quote-unquote pastor, you are a hypocrite. It's hypocritical. Because the pastor is exactly the thing that we are fighting here, the censorship of the totalitarian state. But that's exactly what goes on in a so-called church these days, in the church ritual that was inherited from Catholicism. Also, Jesus said in Matthew 24, the first warning he gave to the disciples regarding the times of his return in the end times, the first warning, he warned of many people coming in the name of Christ, in his name, that would lead many people astray. Now, the various translations have crafted various passages over time to support their pastor-centered theology, right? But the translation for Christ there simply is anointed one. There are other instances in the Bible where anointed one doesn't refer to Lord Jesus Christ, because Christ means Messiah, which means anointed one. When Jesus said that many would come claiming to be an anointed one, he wasn't saying that many would come claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ. Obviously, there haven't been many people claiming to be Lord Jesus Christ that have led many people astray. The few that have claimed to be Lord Jesus Christ have been all recognized as having poor mental health. That isn't going to fool the many. The only thing Jesus could have been talking about many people claiming to be coming in his name as an anointed one, leading many people astray, are bishops, priests, reverends, and pastors. And they have been leading many people astray over the centuries. And they have recently led many people astray regarding the mark of the Antichrist. And it is because it is judgment for this. As Jesus said, he is coming to make war with those, the Nicolaitans, for their works and their doctrine. The reason why most quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, and you know what I'm talking about, is because it is judgment for their doctrine. It is judgment for the once saved, always saved doctrine. It is judgment for the dispensationalism doctrine, which says to them that it couldn't possibly be the mark of the Antichrist because the rapture hasn't happened yet, and all quote-unquote Christians haven't been raptured, which is rooted in their Nicolaitan sovereign grace, free grace, Nicolaitan doctrine. And the Lord has provided countless signs that confirm the precise identity of what the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is, which is sovereign grace and free grace that come in the packages of Calvinism and dispensationalism, that both lead to once saved, always saved, our righteousnesses as filthy rags, one verse that Luther took out of context to develop his entire theology, etc. Reformed theology is the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. That leads to the Church of Laodicea, the complacent Church of Laodicea, that thinks it is in need of nothing, but that Jesus says is blind, pitiable, naked, and is lukewarm, and he wants to vomit out of his mouth. But as Jesus said, he reproves whom he loves. And so the end times is a reproving of the mainstream church, but especially the American evangelical church, whom he loves, because the American evangelical church is the Church of Laodicea. Despite it being lost and its Nicolaitanism, Jesus still loves this church. But he isn't in the church. As he says to the Church of Laodicea, he is knocking at the door in order to be let in. It's funny, the evangelicals will use that passage for unbelievers, but it is meant for them. And it's quite something to think about, to think that the Lord isn't in this church and is knocking at the door to be let in because it has shut him out. And so part of this leading people astray of the Nicolaitans, the pastors and their sycophant followers, will be the aliens pretending to be demons. Now, the Lord has designed it that the ultimate Nicolaitan, the Pope, will be the one leading the way in this deception. But there will be pastors that will fall in line. There is a consequence for following Jehovah's Witness error, for example. Following the leaders, the Nicolaitans, will lead to being led astray, which is why, again, most quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. Now, the commonly held objections to why this can't be the mark of the Antichrist are answered in the snake bite video. Watch that video. But it is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship or a supposed new age of dispensation after quote-unquote all Christians will be raptured. And again, it is judgment for that particular doctrine. And it is judgment for having a pastor. Because Jesus said strictly and forbid having any pastors or teachers other than him. And when you submit to a pastor and go to one of these church rituals, you are symbolically putting yourself under another teacher. So, stop. In other words, preachers that preach on the end times, it's ironic because the purpose of the end times is, or the reason for the end times is pastors. They are the reason for the end times. The primary purpose of the end times is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians. which will be tested, for example, through, which has already been tested, the mark of the Antichrist. Now, by the way, I do not believe that one cannot repent. There's nowhere in the Bible that says one cannot repent after having taken the mark of the Antichrist. But another test of faith will be demons pretending to be aliens. And that's the reason for going on at length here before we return to this diagram. And that's because if one is a quote-unquote Christian, it'll be obvious to them that it is impossible for there to be aliens. Because for one thing, it would imply that they are superior to us, but a biblical worldview has the earth at the center of the universe and man at the center of God's creation. The entire creation is for the purpose of God's church and developing his church. And that's why God took the form of a man, Jesus, and died for the sins of men and conquered death through his resurrection. And so, what are we to believe? That God became an alien and died for the sins of the aliens on other planets and hopscotched around the universe doing this? Or the atonement of Jesus as a man atoned for the aliens as well? There are no aliens. Okay? And that's why Pope Francis will announce that there are aliens, and why other pastors who have the spirit of Antichrist in them because they are being disobedient by being pastors will go along with it. All right? The passages that pastors use, by the way, to support their being paid for their preaching are taken out of context. They don't include the passage that comes right before it or the other passages that contradict it. The only thing that Paul spoke of regarding this is preaching for food. It's fine for someone to preach for food, but not to preach to the church for money. Okay? And anyway, so I've explained enough here. Now, let's see. What I was getting at is Pope Francis. The reason why he declared on the day of the Scott Scheffler sign regarding him being charged for crimes in the 15th state and all of that is because Scheffler means bailiff, and bailiff are known for their keys. All right? And the Vatican is also symbolized by keys. The symbol of the Vatican is keys because of Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus said he was giving them the keys to bind and loose. However they bind and loose on earth will be bound in heaven. But if we go 3 chapters later, Jesus spoke about to Christians, regular Christians, about binding and loosening, and how what they bind and loosen will be bound and loosened in heaven. When Jesus spoke about someone in the church who has someone having something against another person, approaching that person, and if they don't listen, go tell 2 or 3 others, and then go to that person again, and if they still don't listen, bring in the whole church. And then if not, don't listen then cast them out, right? This is the binding and loosening. So this is regular churches. This isn't for popes. And furthermore, Peter isn't the popes aren't descendants from Peter. There was one time in history there was 4 popes at the same time. But also, what Jesus said. So here's the thing. The entire Catholic religion hinges on this one passage in Matthew chapter 16. Jesus asked his disciples, who do they think he is? And Peter was the first to state publicly that he thought or believed that he is the Christ, the Messiah, spoken of in Bible prophecy. Then Jesus responded and said, Simon, you are Peter, which is a Greek word that means rock. Upon this rock I'm going to build my church. So the name Peter, Petros, is the masculine word for rock in Greek, and it means stone or a rock or a pebble. Then Jesus said he's going to build his church on this rock, which is Petra, which means bedrock. It's a different rock. And obviously, it makes sense that Jesus would build a building on a foundation of bedrock, not a man. That's blasphemy. Jesus wasn't saying he was going to build his church on Peter. He's building his church on the truth that Peter had just stated, which is that he is the Christ. Now, when you disprove that disproves the entire Catholic religion, because the Catholic religion is man-made religion on top of the Bible. That's not controversial. Everyone knows that. But they claim to have the authority to have all of this extra biblical stuff and traditions because they claim that popes are descended from Peter and he has the authority to make up all of this stuff. Well, anyway, so keys symbolize the Vatican. Also, Roswell in New Mexico is in Chavez County, and that means keys in Spanish. That's because Revelation chapter 9, which includes Revelation 9:11, we spoke of earlier, with King Abaddon, is the description of the key that will open the shaft to the bottomless pit, from which the fallen angels will cross over the bridge into the earthly realm. And that's why we have on this May 17th, 2024 date, Pope Francis declaring that the Vatican is the sole authority regarding supernatural phenomena. On the day of this Scott Scheffler sign, the sign was explained at the beginning of the video, but Scheffler means keys. And Scott and Francis hint at the Scott-Francis Key Bridge, which is the formal name of the Baltimore Bridge that collapsed, right up here in the diagram. It's the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It's the Francis Scott Key Bridge. That's why Francis and Scott and Key on May 17th. But what is the bridge symbolism for? As I explained, it's symbolism for the crossing over of demons into the earthly realm after the key opens the bottomless pit. That's why the bridge collapsed in Baltimore, named Francis Scott Key. Now, Francis Scott Key was the author of the Star-Spangled Banner national anthem, making this Pope Francis Bridge for Fallen Angels prophetic sign, which was the collapse of the bridge, a warning of judgment for America. And furthermore, it occurred in Maryland. Historically, Maryland is the Catholic state of the states. It was originally settled by Catholics. That's why it's named Maryland. And furthermore, it connects with Pope Francis declaring that only he has the authority to declare Mary apparitions. How does it connect? Well, the day that the bridge collapsed in Baltimore, on March 26th, was 52 days before the Francis Scott Key signs on May 17th. 52 because it is a number that God uses in his signs to symbolize 2 times 26 and the 226th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means prophetic sign. And so in other words, it just simply means that this bridge is a prophetic sign and it connects to this prophetic sign. The Francis Scott Key signs connect to the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Now, James Earl Jones will die 5 + 2 weeks exactly, which also hints at 52 and therefore prophetic sign. James Earl Jones is predicted to die on July 5th, exactly 5 + 2 weeks after the Pope Francis sign and the Scott Scheffler sign, which is 52 days after the Baltimore Bridge sign. That is amazing because James Earl Jones spoke the national anthem, the Star-Spangled National Anthem, at the opening of the 1993 All-Star Game in Baltimore, right near the Francis Scott Key Bridge. James Earl Jones read the poem at the opening of the '89 World Series broadcast, and he spoke the national anthem at the opening of the All-Star Game in '93. The owner of the Baltimore Orioles, as I explained earlier, bought the franchise at the age of 47 in 1993. This was the year, this All-Star Game, in which the president attended with the Queen of America, of England, which is king symbolism. It was in 93. James Earl Jones is predicted to die at the age of 93, 39 days before the coming solar flare from the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. And that is why it is amazing beyond words that the day that James Earl Jones spoke the national anthem next to the Francis Scott Key Bridge is exactly 753 months in 1993 before the predicted solar flare from the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. 753 months, 753 is the 74th prime number, and this is a number that God uses in his signs to hint at the date 7-4, which symbolizes America. And we are talking about the national anthem. America's national anthem connects with the number 74 and the date 7-4 symbolism to the date it is predicted that the power grid will be knocked out in America. And James Earl Jones is associated with power outages. He read the poem right before the power went out in the broadcast booth. It is so amazing beyond words. But it all comes full circle too, because I've now explained how James Earl Jones connects to the Baltimore Bridge collapse, but at the time of the earthquake that occurred after he read the poem, the bridge collapsed in San Francisco. I should say San Francisco. And I explained how it points to Pope Francis through the prophecy in Revelation 17 regarding a fifth and eighth king. And O.J. Simpson was about a highway. The bridge in Oakland was about a highway. The I-80 and the I-5, which hints at the fifth and eighth kings in the prophecy, to point to the prophecy in general. And now you can see with this king symbolism, we are talking about King Abaddon and the opening of the bottomless pit with the key, which is why ultimately the Bay Bridge pointed to the Baltimore Bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge, and this connects through the Francis and Scott Scheffler, as in Key's sign, to the date it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die. The 5 + 2 weeks is also 49 days. O.J. Simpson played for the 49ers, and the San Francisco 49ers hint at Pope Francis as well. The 9/11 day, or rather Revelation 9/11 day, will be 22 days after the predicted death of James Earl Jones on July 27th. This is the day of the symbolic beginning of the fifth trumpet, which is Revelation chapter 9. It will involve 5G frequencies. It is 5G frequencies that will facilitate the self-assembling things that are inside people as a result of having taken the thing, which will induce demonic possession. We are talking about a coming zombie pandemic, a mass demonic possession, and that's where all of this is leading to. The reason for 22 days is that the number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in the book of Ezekiel would have been a Tav letter. The Tav is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet and the 22nd letter. And the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. This fifth trumpet and 5G is also why on the day that James Earl Jones spoke the national anthem at the Baltimore All-Star game, the ceremonial first pitch was thrown by Brooks Robinson, Mr. Orioles. Okay? Mr. Orioles again died exactly 2 times 3 months before the 2 times 3 deaths, which was what the Baltimore Bridge was known for, the 6 deaths. Brooks Robinson played his entire 23-year career in Baltimore. That's why he threw the first pitch at the All-Star game when it was played in Baltimore that year. And God uses pitchers on the pitching mound as symbolism for the Antichrist on the Temple Mount in Bible prophecy. Brooks Robinson wore jersey number 5, which confirms the 5th trumpet, which is what Revelation 9 is about, when the key, as in the Francis Scott Key Bridge, will open up the shaft to the bottomless pit. But the Antichrist is the 44th president, which is why 4 plus 4 years after player number 5 threw the ceremonial first pitch was the day that the 44th president threw the ceremonial first pitch at the All-Star game. Sorry, it's 4 times 4 years, not 4 plus 4 years. 4 times 4 years, 16 years, before the 44th president threw the first pitch from the pitching mound, the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, to player number 5, who played for the Los Angeles Angels, as in fallen angels. Okay, and that World Series was in St. Louis, the 2009 World Series, which is where Kamala Harris is predicted to die in a plane crash, right next to the Gateway Arch, because in the Bible, judgment on a nation or people symbolically begins at the gate. But that World Series was the first World Series in St. Louis since 1966, as in 66, as in 666, the Antichrist. That was the year that Brooks Robinson won the MVP award. He was the MVP in that World Series, and it all comes full circle. It's amazing. And by the way, when Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, she will be replaced by Michelle Robinson Obama. Her maiden name is Robinson. That's why Brooks Robinson. Brooks Robinson died 2 times 3 months before 2 times 3 deaths, and God pairs 23 and 44 together, as I explained, and the day that the bridge collapsed was exactly 4 times 4 days before the news of the death of O.J. Simpson broke, and it all comes full circle there too. O.J. Simpson, again, just like Kamala Harris, who will die in St. Louis, she's from San Francisco, as is O.J. Simpson, as I explained, and she's the 49th vice president. O.J. Simpson played for the 49ers, which is why it is from the day of O.J. Simpson's death, 4 times 9 days, to the Dow Jones sign and the Scott Scheffler Pope Francis signs, as I have explained, which again connect to O.J. Simpson. Again, O.J. Simpson is a hint at James Earl Jones, Orenthal James Simpson. Orenthal is an anagram for Earl. Okay, and O.J. Simpson, these signs on May 17th are in turn 49 days before the predicted death of James Earl Jones. So again, from the death of the former 49er, it is 4 times 9 days. To the Dow Jones sign, and then it is 49 days to the predicted death of James Earl Jones. Also on the day that O.J. Simpson died was the sumo wrestling king, the first champion of Japanese sumo wrestling from outside of Japan, a non-Japanese, and he is from America, a Pacific Islander. He died on this day. He's king symbolism. And also on this day, we had another Pacific Islander sign, which is all explained in the O.J. Simpson video. It's an amazing, amazing video. Must-watch video. To finish up here in this diagram, the day that O.J. Simpson had the car chase was 2,643 days before 9/11. That hints at the 2,643rd word in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word reconciliation. God warned on 9/11 for America to reconcile with him. And although O.J. Simpson committed murder, bloody murder, it was still possible for O.J. Simpson to be reconciled to God. 9/11 was 1,190, which hints at 9/11% of a calendar year after the 1989 World Series earthquake. That is an astounding connection. I was floored when I recently discovered this because I have known for years that the 1989 World Series earthquake was in the warning sign, was in the league of 9/11. Of course, 9/11 is the big one, but there's something about the 1989 World Series earthquake that made it a judgment warning for the entire nation of America, just like 9/11. And lo and behold, I didn't know it, but it connects with 1,190% of a year. It's amazing. And again, on 9/11, it was 56 passengers in the plane, and there's a 56 months connection involved here too. James Earl Jones, again, is king symbolism, and ultimately we are also talking about King Abaddon in Revelation 9:11. That's related to Francis because he comes out of the pit. He's the king of the fallen angels, but the pit is opened with the key, and the Vatican is symbolized by keys because the Vatican will open with the key the bottomless pit. And that's why it's been all along the case that the Nicolaitans, the ultimate one being Pope Francis, but pastors are also the same thing, be the one to open the bottomless pit. Again, the end times is because of pastors, so-called anointed teachers. The Word of God, fellowships, and the Holy Spirit are sufficient for sharpening iron upon iron and learning and being led by the only teacher and leader, Jesus Christ. The date that O.J. Simpson had the prophetic car chase is 27 years and 6 months exactly to the return of the comet Leo sign. This hints at the 276th, the number 276, which is one of 3 unusually specific numbers in the Bible, all of which are triangular numbers, and this one is the 23rd triangular number, and the Antichrist wore jersey number 23, making this 23 pair with the comet that left the solar system at 44 miles per second and returned after 40 plus 40,000 years. A pairing of 23 and 44 that confirms the signs and connections. Also, 276 is an anagram, if you will, for 726, which is the number, as I explained earlier, that symbolizes the rapture because of the 726th word. And the return of the comet Leo with the planet Venus is a rapture sign. Because in the rapture, the Lord's people will meet the Lord in the sky, in the clouds, which is symbolized by Venus in the night sky. And this is coming together, as in God's people coming together with Christ in the clouds. That's why the comet made its closest cometary in conjunction with the planet Venus. So we have a rapture connection here as well. Now, to finish up this diagram, we'll talk about the significance of the date of birth of James Earl Jones. I already mentioned how it was 7 years and 77 days before the birth of the 7th Commissioner of Baseball, which God used to point to the first Commissioner of Baseball, as I explained earlier. who was given unchecked power over every person in baseball 666 days after the 18th Amendment was ratified, and 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, and the 18th Amendment is about the restriction of buying and selling food, which is analogous or alluding to the restriction of buying and selling, alcohol, which is alluding to what Bible prophecy talks about, which is the restriction of buying and selling food from the Antichrist and Rome, for that matter. Revelation chapter 6, it's speaking of this. Now, the word in the Hebrew Concordance, the 1117th word in the Hebrew Concordance, H1117, is the word Bama, proper noun, capital B, place. It means high place, but it's a proper noun. And that's why this is an amazing connection, because from the date 117, which also hints at this, it is 1,117 months exactly to this date, which was known ahead of time to be a date for James Earl Jones' signs, and then we received the sign that was relevant to it. Okay, I'll just go, this date was known ahead of time, this date was known ahead of time to expect a sign, this date was known ahead of time, well, obviously May 17th was known ahead of time, and let's see, May 11th was known to be a James Earl Jones date ahead of time. Okay, you get the idea. So anyway, this date was known ahead of time because of this connection. One reason being. And that's because of hinting at Obama, because Jesus said in Luke 10:18 that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And the word lightning in Hebrew means is Bama, and the word Barack. Yeah, the name Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. Barack means lightning. Bama means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven, as for example it is said that Lucifer fell from the high place. And O in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, is from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. Either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said this, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said this anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. And obviously the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. And so that's why this is amazing. But what happened on this date was we actually not only had a James Earl Jones sign, but we had a high place sign. Because on this day, we had a rare solar flare from the South Pole that was known for its height. It dropped 200,000 kilometers below, because it's the South Pole, in other words, above the surface of the sun. And that's an extraordinary height above the sun for a solar flare. But also, solar flares do not typically occur at the South Pole. They occur at the equator. But this occurred right at the South Pole, like literally, like it's amazing. You can see it online if you want. And so, but it's also indicative of reaching the solar maximum, which is the timing of why the solar flare that's going to be powerful enough to knock out the power grid will happen. All right? Now, the date that this occurred is also very interesting, is that it occurred on the date 217, February 17th. That's because the date that the flood judgment began in the Bible was the date 217. Peter said that the coming judgment, destruction, would be symbolized by fire instead of water. But the flood began on the date 217, which is why we have this number of days, 139 days from this sign, because again, James Earl Jones is about the coming solar flare from the sun, because he is the voice of the Lion King, and God is using a metaphor of a lion's roar to symbolize the coming solar flare. Okay, so 139 days from this solar flare, which connects to James Earl Jones's birth, is the date it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die. Now, the reason why 139 days is astounding is that it is the 34th prime number, and 34 is a number God uses in his signs because it is 2 times 17. For example, there were 34s in the stock market signs on the day of 9/11 when 2 planes struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart. But anyway, the number 34 embeds the number 217, which hints at the destruction of the flood, and that's why it connects with this date 217. Okay, it's amazing. And then again, James Earl Jones's death connects on with 39 days because he'll die at the age of 93, which hints at 39, to the date of the solar flare from the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. So that's amazing there, okay? Now also, there is a 90 days connection, and that's a pairing of 9 and 17, and the Antichrist was the president from 9 until 2017. Okay, and it's also Constitution Day in America is the date 9/17, and he was the unconstitutional president. So anyway, God pairs 9 and 17 to confirm his signs, and this is one such instance, and that's why it is 1,117 months, followed by exactly 90 days to the Dow Jones sign, which again connects to the James Earl Jones predicted death sign. All right. Now, just a couple more things. The date that James Earl Jones was born was exactly 71 months before the date that Pope Francis was born. That's amazing because 71 is the 20th prime number, which hints at 9 plus 11. And again, Pope Francis will be involved in opening the key to the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 9, which is symbolized by Revelation 9:11, the king of the bottomless pit, King Abaddon. And Pope Francis is a king, the 7th king, and James Earl Jones is king symbolism. All right, now, again, his birth in turn connects with exactly 85 years to the return of the comet Leo sign, which again is an Antichrist sign, as I have explained. Also, it's 85 is associated with Barack Obama because the big year in Obama's history is when he moved to Chicago in 85. 85 began a 30-year cycle, and in the Bible, again, 30 years symbolizes a king, from in which all of the professional sports teams in Chicago won their championships, including the Chicago Blackhawks, who won while Obama was the president, and the Chicago White Sox, who won while Obama was in Washington, D.C. also as a senator, and the Chicago Cubs that finished off the 30-year cycle that began with the Chicago Bears win of the Super Bowl in 1986 with the 85 season, and culminating with the Chicago Cubs winning the World Series for the first time in 108 years in 2016, and then visiting the 44th president in the White House 4 days before he left office and being presented by star player number 44 with jersey number 44. Okay, so he moved to Chicago in 85 because that was the year that the organization that he belonged to disbanded, which was the May 19th Communist Organization, named after the birth dates of Malcolm X and Ho Chi Minh. So 85 is also a number for Barack Obama, and again, this comet left the solar system at 44 miles per second, and 40 plus 40,000 years after it is when it returned. Okay, so now just a couple more things. James Earl Jones was born exactly 23 years, which is again prophetic because of many reasons, but one also is because of the 23rd, the president that wore jersey 23, but also the number 23 is the 9th prime number. 2 divided by 3 is 0.666, and the reason why that is because taking the mark of the Antichrist is tantamount to denying Jesus, and Jesus told Peter that the rooster would not crow twice before Peter would deny him 3 times. All right. Okay, now this gets us to the date that RFK Jr. was born, and RFK Jr. is God's voice in his signs regarding the thing, the mark of the Antichrist, the truth about the thing industry, etc. A voice for truth. Speaking the truth about the deep state and the corruption in the double government, okay? And his family being at war with the CIA throughout his entire life, and on and on. And the truth about what happened or the truth about how the CIA assassinated John F. Kennedy, and on and on. So anyway, that's the reason why JFK has an issue with his voice, JFK Jr. It's because it is symbolic of how he is God's voice. Now, 7 years in the most central prophecy in the Bible symbolizes the period of the end times. JFK Jr. said that the speech that Eisenhower gave on his birthday was the most important speech in US history, and he was correct. This was the speech in which Eisenhower warned of science being used as propaganda, and he warned of the military-industrial complex. That's the famous military-industrial complex speech, his farewell speech, before JFK Jr.'s uncle took the office 3 days later. And Eisenhower warned of exactly what caused the death of the president that became president 3 days after his farewell speech, the military-industrial complex. The deep-seated, immovable, unaccountable government within the government. Now, 30 years symbolizes a king. James Earl Jones's king symbolism. The King Eisenhower, the president, gave the most important speech in American history exactly 30 years after the birth of James Earl Jones. This is so very important because the mark of the Antichrist, the thing, is a military-industrial complex operation. That's not even a secret. For example, we have Operation beginning spelled W-A-R-P, the Operation W-A-R-P, Speed. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, so just for example, but the distribution of it in this so-called emergency was done through the military, the DoD. The thing itself involved the manufacturing of it didn't get manufactured in, a big factory that begins with the company, begins with a PF. No. There's a supply chain, and all of it is contracted with the DoD. Okay, that's enough of that, though. There's more than enough information out there on the internet if you want to know the truth about how the DoD is responsible for the thing. And this prediction that is from God, the purpose of it is to prove what I have just said. Make no mistake, the reason why God has given me a voice, if you will, through this prediction is to prove the controversial things that are being explained in God's big picture of science, including what I have just said. That's why this speech was 30 years exactly after the birth of the king, James Earl Jones. 30 years symbolizes a king. What do we have on this date? A king. It's an Oval Office speech. It's a big deal for the kings of America, the presidents, to do. It is the most important speech. That's why it's confirmed with the birth of JFK Jr., who said it was. In other words, God is revealing all of what I have just said. Now, one last connection here is that the day of the most important speech in American history that confirms for people that there is a conspiracy, all right? There's conspiracy nonsense theory, and then there's conspiracy fact. This conspiracy fact that the president was even talking about from the Oval Office. Okay, get that, right? The president was talking in his farewell speech about a conspiracy, which is 3 days later, the president replacing him meeting his demise through this conspiracy, the military-industrial complex. Okay, so now this speech is exactly 760 months before this prophetic date here, which leads to everything. The Dow Jones reaching 40,000 for the first time. Okay, it's ultimately pointing to the coming collapse of the financial system, which will lead to the digital currency that will enforce the mark of the Antichrist through restricting the buying and selling of food. But the reason for the significance of 760 months is because it hints at the number 76, and that the 76th prime number is 226. The 226th word in Strong's Concordance, again, is the Hebrew word that means prophetic sign. In other words, God's communicated that the Eisenhower speech was, in fact, a prophetic sign. Now, I didn't go a couple of things here. The solar flare connects to the Noah flare. So 4 plus 4 days earlier, okay, was on February 9th, 2024, massive X flare that came from sunspot 3575, if I remember correctly, but whatever number that is, and I believe I'm correct, is the word in the concordance for Noah. Okay, and again, this was the Noah flare here because of the date, 217. Before it, plus 4 days earlier, was the Noah flare, which came from the sunspot that hints at Noah. And in other words, the coming destruction, which Peter said would be symbolized by fire instead of water. But this is confirmed with the second witness because this date here in turn connects with 44 days, which confirms the 4 plus 4 days. And again, the 44th president is the Antichrist. To this April 1st date, which was known ahead of time to be expecting a solar flare sign. In fact, I thought prior to this at one point, but I believe it was recognized beforehand that it wouldn't be. Yeah, it was recognized beforehand, but at one point I thought this would be the day of the solar flare. Anyway, that's the day that 7 deaths occurred accidentally when the IDF shot at the World Central Kitchen convoy, food aid in Gaza. World Central Kitchen. That's extremely amazing because, well, the coming solar flare is going to cause food shortages. And that's why the World Central Kitchen sign on this date, which was expected ahead of time. One of the reasons being is that it was 44 days after this solar flare here. And it also, by the way, God pairs 9 and 44 and 44 and 17 to confirm his signs. And we just explained that down here too. All right, now the solar flare sign, the shooting down, and by the way, the World Central Kitchen was attacked from the air, just like the solar flare will come from the sky. Okay. Now this date here is 19 weeks and 1 day, which hints at 9/11, to the solar flare. Okay, it's also 134 days, and on the Dow Jones day, the Dow Jones gained 134 points, but that's because the number 134 is the 45th semi-prime number, and King Cyrus in the 45th chapter of Isaiah. Okay, but also 45 is the 9th prime triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 45th row is the number the last number in the 9th row is the number 45. And the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment. So, but importantly, we have the 9/11 connection as well from the World Central Kitchen, which hints at the food shortages caused by the coming solar flare, to the date of the predicted solar flare that will cause food shortages through knocking out the power grid. All right, this amazing story diagram that God has demonstrated here has been explained. Oh, one more thing, actually. This solar flare here was exactly, wow, this is so important. Hopefully you've made it this far in the video. The solar flare here on February 17th, this James Earl Jones solar flare, as I have explained, was exactly 188 weeks after the Lion's Roar super flare. What do I mean? Well, first of all, this date itself hints at the Antichrist, because the Day of Atonement and the defeat of the Antichrist will be on the 10th day of the 7th month. But this was the published scientific report from the university scientists in Kyoto, Japan, after their discovery of the strongest super flare ever detected on another planet. It was 20 times stronger than any super flare we've ever detected, because of it's 20 times stronger than any super flare on our sun. The star that had this super flare was right in the neck in the constellation Leo, the lion, which is why the media dubbed this story of this discovery the lion's roar. And this was back in the beginning when I first put the pieces of the puzzle together and realized that James Earl Jones was the voice of the Lion King, and this is what it's all pointing to, the coming solar flare on the sun. This lion's roar, super flare, is exactly 188 weeks before this solar flare that was expected in advance. And then we had a prophetic solar flare. 188. Well, I expected a James Earl Jones sign on this date. I expected a solar flare on this date. Well, no, sorry. Yes, I already explained all that. Anyway, okay. So, but the point is, 188 is a number God frequently uses in his signs because H188 in the Hebrew concordance is the word that means woe exclamation mark, used in the context in the Bible of extreme judgment from God. And so here you have it, my friends. We have the lion's roar super flare in the neck of the constellation Leo the lion. Connect with the solar flare sign on the South Pole that went high, a James Earl Jones sign, as I have explained. And it connects to the date that James Earl Jones will die, which connects with the date of the solar flare, the predicted super flare from the sun that will knock out the power grid. Also, there's another way in which this connects. This lion's roar connects with the solar flare on February 17th, which connects with 44 days to the World Kitchen, Central Kitchen sign, which connects with 9/11 symbolism to the solar flare. So there's two ways in which it connects. Well, actually three, because it also connects with 90 days to this Dow Jones and the signs on May 17th, which connect with 49 days to James Earl Jones, and then 39 days. So there are a number of ways in which the lion's roar super flare connects to the super flare that's coming, which will be a lion's roar, judgment from the Lord. And in the Bible, the Messiah is descended from the tribe of Judah, which is symbolized by the lion. That's why Lord Jesus Christ is the Lion King. Okay, I forgot one astounding connection here, which is that the day that James Earl Jones spoke the national anthem on July 13th, 1993, is exactly 11,230 days. And this is amazing because it hints at H188, because 1,123 is the 188th prime number, which again hints at woe exclamation mark. It's very serious. James Earl Jones spoke at the Baltimore All-Star game next to the Francis Scott Key Bridge, 11,230 days before the date it was predicted that James Earl Jones would die. But then we received this James Earl Jones sign, which was the death of Orenthal James Simpson and the death of the King sumo wrestler. And again, O.J. Simpson connects to the James Earl Jones reading of the poem at the World Series because of the connections, as I have explained, the I-80 and I-5 highways and the 56 months exact connections, the two broadcasts of the championships being interrupted, etc. All right, and then as I explained, this date connects with 4 times 9 days and then 49 days to the date it is predicted that James Earl Jones will die. So this is how James Earl Jones speaking at the national anthem also connects to all of these signs. Sorry, speaking the national anthem in Baltimore, next to near the Francis Scott Key Bridge, the national anthem bridge. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived, And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.